Chapter 28-27 A gamble that depends on power. I wonder if the method to kill a god is useful with God's knife. Hansen's heart jumped. He summoned Skyvine Radish and threw a punch toward God's knife. Pang! God's knife was not damaged, but the blood flame demon was hit by Skyvine Radish. The flames of its composure went everywhere. It really works. Is that thing a god too? Hansen was delighted. Skyvine Radish was strong. It kept punching the blood flame demon. It made the blood flame demon shatter and shimmer everywhere. It was unable to fight back. God's knife was already falling back. Now Skyvine Radish was attacking it. The bloody fires of the knife were becoming weaker. In the end, the bloody flame was broken by Skyvine Radish. God's knife turned dim, as if it had lost all control. Hansen flew in front of the god's knife, picked it up off the ground, and discovered that God's knife was nothing more than an ordinary sharp knife without its power. Both of his hands held a separate side of the sharp knife. He wanted to break the knife, but he was unable to achieve what he wanted. The knife was still as hard as before. It just did not have a lively presence inside it anymore. Hansen thought, I didn't hear the hunting announcement. Perhaps that means I didn't kill it. He put God's knife inside Destiny's tower and kept it suppressed. Wanner, follow me. I am going to take you to see Lone Bamboo. Hansen said as he approached Wanner. Do you know my brother? Wanner was happy, but then she looked sad and shook her head. You should leave now. I cannot come with you. God's knife has already been suppressed by me. What more do you need to concern yourself with? Hansen saw in Wanner's face that she was hiding something. I signed a contract with a god. I cannot leave here. If I do, I will end up causing my big brother harm. Wanner shook her head. What contract? Hansen asked with a frown. Wanner shook her head and said, I cannot tell you. If I tell you, big brother will be in danger. Hansen knew he could not blame Wanner for thinking that way. If he was in her position, he would feel as if this was a trick too. Before being 100% sure, he would never try to do something that could put his family at risk. I will not force you to come with me, but God's knife has been suppressed by me. Will the god be okay with that? Hansen looked at Wanner as he spoke. Wanner nibbled her lips but did not say anything. She was unsure. How about this? Hansen went on to say, tell me where that god is, and I will go out and look for it. I will see if there is a way for me to kill it. If the god Wanner had signed a contract with was the same as evil Lotus god, perhaps there was a chance for Hansen to kill it. If he did that, Wanner would be free again. Wanner still shook her head and said, you should go. A god is not something we can deal with. He is so powerful, and he is everywhere. But I did manage to suppress the god's knife. Suppressing a god is not something impossible. Hansen tried to convince her. This is different. The god's knife is just a knife. It's one of God's toys. How can it compare with the god itself? The power of a god is not something we can feasibly comprehend. After that, Wanner's small face had a frightening expression. It was as if she was in the recollection of something terrible. How can you know it won't work if you haven't given it a go? If your big brother Lone Bamboo knew you were here, I am sure he would want to see you again. Hansen hoped to use Lone Bamboo to change her mind. Wanner looked hesitant, but then confidently shook her head. Thanks a lot, but please do not tell big brother about me. You should leave now. The god's knife has been affected, and I am sure the god must have felt it. When he comes, it will be too late for you to escape. It is already too late. Wanner's last sentence was spoken a different tone of voice. She was like a different person. Hansen's face changed. He saw Wanner's body start to morph with a blurry god light. It was like her entire body was being showered in the morning light. Her eyes became weirdly clear. She appeared to become an emotionless machine. You have broken into my farm and destroyed my knife spirit. You are a very interesting person. Wanner looked at Hansen with interest as she spoke. Her face was like a king in a high place, looking down on a clown's performance at the circus. Hansen coldly looked at Wanner and asked, are you the god? Hansen suddenly realized something, but he did not know what it was. Yes, I am God. Wanner smiled and nodded. She stared at Hansen and asked, what is your name? What race do you belong to? I am Dollar. I am a human, Hansen answered. Wanner shook her head and said, You are not a human. Humans don't look like you. You are a xenogenic. Hansen's heart jumped with shock. Pretty much no creature in the universe knew about humans. But this so-called God seemed to know about the existence of humanity. It also knew that he was not a human. This was a problem. How do you know I am not a human? Hansen quickly asked. If I think you are not a human, then you are not a human, Wana replied. There is no why. What is your name? Hansen asked. I am God, Wana answered. Don't gods have a title? Something like empty God, sky empty God, and etc.? What is your title? Hansen asked. You know a lot. It is no wonder you were able to destroy the spirit of my knife. It laughed and said, but I do not have a title. You can just call me God. Before Hansen said anything more, God went on to say, you destroyed my knife spirit, and I am okay with that. If you want to take away Waner, you can do that too. But this world is a fair place. You are taking so much, so you should give something back in the interest of fairness, of course. Wouldn't you agree? No. That was something I achieved through my own power. Why should I give out anything? Hansen smiled. God was shocked, but it then laughed. Well said. Something you take through your own power means you shouldn't give out anything. I really like you. How about this? It is rare to find an interesting xenogenic like you. I am giving you a chance now. So let's have a bet. If you can beat me, you can leave without any harm and Waner can go with you. What if I lose? Hansen frowned. If you lose, you are so funny that I wouldn't want to see you die. God went silent. It went on to say, you can replace Waner's job here. You can feed God's knife for the next century. That's not fair, Hansen said with a smile. If I win, you do not have to give anything. If I lose, I have to give you 100 years of my time. Why would I take part in such an unfair gamble? Because that is a bet that involves my own power, God said with a smile. Hansen was going to say there was nothing he could to him if he didn't do anything. Before he said anything, he shockingly noticed that within God's stare, his hands were not listening to him. He held his neck and squeezed. He squeezed himself so hard that he was going to suffocate. With Hansen's will and power, he was unable to control his own body. Inside the Sea of Soul, the black crystal armor reduced its presence. It pretended it did not exist. There was no reaction. Chapter 28:28 Predicting the Future. God smiled at Hansen as it asked, can we agree to a bet now? Hansen could not speak. He felt as if he was going to be strangled to death, so he had to nod. Nice. You have made the right choice. Using your power is more interesting. God laughed. Should it be me who is deciding what to risk? Hansen rubbed his throat. He realized now that this God was a bit evil. It seemed very casual, but it was scarier than the other gods he had encountered. It gave Hansen real pressure, and it was exerting a sense of danger the other gods had not been able to accomplish. Before, it really did not matter, God said. Now I have met a really interesting creature like you. That is why I want to play my favorite game. What game is that? Hansen's brain moved fast. His only option was to escape. He could not defeat this god. Even if he could beat this god, the god had taken over Waner's body. He could not risk killing Waner along with it. Also, the black crystal armor had strangely hidden itself. That had never happened before. When he used to meet the kings, he had not seen the black crystal armor react like this. That just showed how scary this god truly was. Hansen thought gods like the kings would not deal damage to creatures in the universe. Gods like Evil Lotus God, which could hit creatures, were not his enemy. He used Sky Vine Radish and his phoenix feather to establish a tie. This god was totally different. It was possessing Waner and still able to wield massive power. It was clearly a god spirit operating on a whole new level. This god, is it the one that met the seventh team? Hansen wondered. It is so simple. We will predict the fate of each other. God's face looked so weird, but only for a second. Predict fate? Predict whose fate? Hansen asked with a frown. It can be anybody. You can pick any creature you want, God said. It then moved its hand. God light turned into a mirror. The mirror had many shadows. There were all kinds of creatures from the universe there. I don't like altering the fates of others, Hansen said. You can come and test my fate. But how will you even predict it, and how will you win? We are just making a bet, God coldly said. We cannot bet on ourselves. You pick a creature. It can be anyone you know. It can even be your family. We will predict the choices they make when something happens. You can decide first. Then, I select the very highest leader, Han Sen said. He was thinking, no matter how strong you are, you cannot affect the very highest leader. It was unknown if God saw what Han Sen was thinking, but it did not care and said, yeah, let's bet with very high leader. How do we bet? Han Sen asked. It is not as if we know what the very high leader is going to do. God did not speak. It walked one step, and came before Han Senator. It pulled Han Sen with him. Han Sen felt as if he fell into a time vortex. He felt so dizzy that he thought he was going to throw up. Many people had carried him away via galaxy teleport. He had almost finished practicing galaxy teleport himself. But it was never this horrible. When everything returned to normal, Han Sen found himself in outer sky. In front of him was the very familiar star tree. The star tree was full of fruit. They looked like many giant planets hanging from the branches of the tree. A young man of the very high was sitting under the star tree with his legs crossed. The man's white clothing was like snow. He looked very handsome and also very cold. He looked like a guy who everybody owed money to. This man. He looks very familiar. Han Sen thought that the young man looked very familiar. This is very high leader, God said next to him. You are lying. I have seen very high leader, and he is an old man. Before Han Sen could finish, his face changed. He suddenly knew why the young man looked so familiar. His facial structure and body looked like very high leader. He just looked younger, so he seemed different. God smiled and said, that is very high leader when he was young. We are here when he was only 20. We went into the past. Han Sen's face changed. He finally understood why it was so difficult to teleport. It was not because he had not just used galaxy teleport. He had teleported through time. There is nothing amazing about it, God casually said. If you want, I can take you to see what you looked like when you were younger. That is fine, Han Sen said. The past is the past. Whatever happens in the future is always meant to be. If you already know how things pan out, what is the point of making a bet? Who told you the future is already set in stone? God looked at Han Sen with shock. Is it not? Han Sen asked with a smile. If the future could be changed, you could just go and kill the very highest leader now. With the power you have, very high leader will obey you. We do not have to go to the past and find the very highest leader. God preferred spending its power on going back to the past than going to meet very high leader. Clearly, it was afraid of something, which was why Han Sen said what he did. God laughed and said, there are rules in this universe. Even God cannot destroy them. But within these rules, there is nothing in there about changing the future. The future is full of unpredictabilities. We come from a change in the future. Now there is some accident affecting it. It might create another future. So we are not sure what the future is going to be. Are you saying that you can affect the young very high leader and make him do decisions that benefit you? Han Sen knew what God was trying to say. You can do the same too. That is only fair. God laughed. Han Sen looked at God seriously and asked, can I ask you a question? It depends on what you ask me, God replied with a smile. I might be God, but I do not know the answer to everything. Han Sen looked at God seriously. It looked different from the other king gods. If you like this game of yours so much, you must have played it many times. Han Sen took a deep breath as he asked, did you ever lose? Yes, I have lost twice. God's answer surprised Han Sr. I am curious as to who defeated you, Han Sen said with shock. One from Sacred and a human called Han Jingji, God coldly said. His face looked weird as he spoke. When Han Sen heard that, his heart began to race like crazy. He almost shouted out loud, Han Jingji. Chapter 28-29 A different kind of God. How did they beat you? Han Sen was holding in the urge to ask, but he buckled. He knew he was now getting closer to the truth behind what happened to the seventh team. This God could certainly be the one encountered by the seventh team. Do you think I will expose my weaknesses to you? God asked with a laugh. Han Sen looked at it strangely. Although it was possessing honor, this God gave Han Sen the feeling that it was the nice and next-door neighbor kind. It did not have that superior presence like June King and the other god spirits gave off. It did not really try to present himself as an invincible deity either. If Han's son had not known it was a god, he would never have imagined it was the sort of being to play with the fates of others. Thinking about the elite humans of the 7th team and the bad things that happened to them, Han's son knew that their appearance and presence could not be trusted. This being that called itself God might have looked kind, but appearances were deceptive. On the inside it was a wretched demon. While they were talking, Very High Leader, who was sitting beneath the tree, stood up. He looked up at one of the star tree's fruits. The star fruits were very difficult to grow naturally, ripen, and fall to the ground. It was a process that took forever. Even people who guarded the star tree did not have that sort of patience. There was now a fruit that had matured naturally. The young Very High Leader stared at the matured fruit with a face that dripping with seriousness. The star fruit that had matured naturally possessed a deified xenogeneic. It was not going to be a primitive or transmutation either. It wasn't that low level. It would be at least larva or butterfly class. Very High Leader was very young. He had only just become primitive, but he was already considered a genius amongst the very high. Such praise did not come easy. Even so, when it came to battling, he was primitive. A primitive going up against a larva or butterfly class fiend was far too much. He did not plan on backing down from the prospect of such a fight, nor did he summon the aid of others of the very high. He silently watched the star fruit with eyes brimming with confidence and pride. The star fruit had some scary light. It was like a sun that was burning at max capacity. When time passed, the star fruit's light became weaker. It changed from white to yellow, yellow to red, red to dark red, and dark red to black. It ended up looking like charcoal. You and I have come here to predict this Very High Leader's actions and see if he can kill the xenogeneic, God said. When he heard that, Han's son frowned. That question was not difficult to answer. The star fruit unleashed a very scary presence. It was stronger than Han's son was now. Very High Leader was just a primitive deified. His power was not enough to fight against the xenogeneic that existed inside such fruit. Also, there were no other Very High there. It would have been impossible for him to slay such a xenogeneic. With Han's son's experience guarding the star tree, he was able to predict that the xenogeneic would escape capture and leave outer sky. It was bound to flee into the mountains nearby. Very High Leader would not be able to stop it. Such an obvious result was impossible for the god to not know already. It had picked the time of this incident with purpose, so it was hard to gauge whether or not it was already prepared for this. Are there any more changes in between this? Did Very High Leader manage to kill that xenogeneic inside the fruit? Hansen thought to himself. He then thought, no, God can't be deliberately tricking me to have me think this is a trick. In fact, I believe the xenogeneic escaped into the mountains without issue. Hansen was shocked. He realized he had made a big mistake. Gambling with people who were professional, when it came to tricks of the mind, was the worst thing possible. He might have merrily walked right into his opponent's scheme. Hansen knew he was an elite when it came to this stuff, so he immediately forced himself to calm down and sort through the information he had at hand. With what he knew thus far, that was how he was going to make his judgment. Very High Leader will not kill the xenogeneic. Hansen made his decision. It was because it was the most likely thing to happen. Hansen had to choose the option that adhered to Occam's razor. Fine. I will select the option that states Very High Leader succeeds and slays the xenogeneic. God laughed coldly. Nothing special was visible on its face, so Hansen could not tell if he was right or wrong. Catcha! The fruit that had turned completely black exploded. It turned into dust and rose. The xenogeneic appeared from behind. There was a semi-transparent set of butterfly wings that opened beautifully like flowers. Behind the butterfly wings, a lady with jade skin used her hands and shoulders to hide her body's important parts. She looked shy. Hansen did not think that the thing that came out of the star fruit would be a xenogeneic like that. He thought, such a beautiful xenogeneic. I do not think men could be cruel enough to harm something like that. Plus, his power is worse than the xenogeneic. He won't be able to kill it. Just as Hansen thought that the young Very High Leader was in shock when he saw that beautiful Xenogeniac. His ice-cold face melted a little. Mr. is a genius of the very high. Butterfly Lady has been in the fruit admiring you for the longest time. If Mr. would not mind, Butterfly Lady would like to follow Mr. The most surprising thing happened. The Xenogeniac was extremely intelligent, and she was butterfly class. On top of that, she was willing to follow Very High Leader, who was only primitive class at the time. That was a very rare thing to happen. It looks like Very High Leader is not going to kill her. Han-sun looked at the scene. He could see God still smiling. It was like everything was none of its business. That made Han-sun feel a little surreal. Things went so smoothly as everything unfolded. It was going too well for Han Senator. The Very High Leader was now just a young man. He did not have the mind of a very high forget love practitioner either. After meeting the beautiful and elegant Butterfly Lady, he suddenly had a weird feeling. The relationship between the two developed quickly. A few days later, they were already kissing each other together like a couple. Now I think you lose. Han-sun had been aware of God. He was not going to let it destroy the relationship between Very High Leader and the Butterfly Lady. Tomorrow, if Very High Leader hasn't killed the Butterfly Lady by tomorrow, then I lose, God said with a smile. Okay. Han-sun agreed, but he thought they are so in love now. One day later, there is no way they could become enemies and try to kill each other. Plus, even if they did turn against each other, the Butterfly Lady is much stronger than Very High Leader. It would probably end up with the Butterfly Lady killing Very High Leader. To prevent the god from doing some tricks, Han-sun stared at him. He was not going to let him disturb Very High Leader and the Butterfly Lady. That night, Very High Leader and Butterfly Lady could not help but eat the forbidden fruit. Han-sun felt relieved and he asked, "Now that it has happened, Very High Leader will not want to kill the Butterfly Lady, right?" Han-sun watched God. It was sitting on the branch of a tree holding its jaw, as it looked at Very High Leader and Butterfly Lady being together. It looked like it was happy for them. God said, "It is a relationship that makes people jealous. If you think this relationship is very nice, does that mean we should not disturb them? How about the bed ends here?" Although things were drifting in Han-sun's favor, he did not think God would lose and concede so easily. It was only a matter of time before God did something. God's eyes looked a bit weird as it said, "No, this is just the beginning of our bet." After that, God's body flashed. It jumped off the tree and stood in front of Very High Leader and Butterfly Lady. Han-sun knew that God was going to strike, so he quickly flashed in front of God. It did not matter what God was planning to do, but he knew he had to stop it. He did not know what God could possibly do to make Very High Leader kill the Butterfly Lady. Chapter 28:30 Sky and Men combined at an extreme level. Very High Leader saw Han-sun and God, frowned, and asked, "Who are you people? How dare you come to the star tree?" If this was a normal race, if an important place was suddenly invaded, they would not have spoken like this. They would have attacked before doing anything. Very High people were different. They were not in a rush to strike. God looked at Very High Leader and coldly said, "It does not matter who we are. What is most important is that you betrayed Very High Forget Love's big love path. You have drowned in a little love and little relationship. Is this really what you want?" Han-sun thought God would use a harsher method. He did not expect God was just going to try and convince the Very High Leader. Although it was quite difficult to convince the Very High Leader to slay the woman who he had fallen in love with, it should have been something impossible. But Han-sun did not drop his guard because of that. Han-sun tried to fight back by saying, "Big love and little love are all love. If you cannot do small love, how can you have big love? What does it have to do with you guys?" Very High Leader looked at Han-sun and God with shock. He did not know where these two people had come from, and suddenly run up to him to talk about love. Of course it is related. God pointed at Very High Leader as he spoke. "You are part of the Very High. Your responsibilities involve learning about the path of the universe. You are here to maintain the balance of the universe. If you are drowned in small love and a small relationship, who can do the things you should be destined to do?" When Han-sun heard him, he thought God was being ridiculous in what he was saying. Although the Very High had Sky and Men combined, it was not at a level that God had mentioned. God's words made it sound like the Very High were superheroes there to maintain world peace. It was like without them, the universe was going to stop spinning. I can plan my own plan, Very High Leader glumly said. There is no need for you guys to tell me what to do. Hansen felt as if this was not a good sign. With the Very High people's personalities, unless something touched the deepest core of their hearts, they would not be showing expressions the way he currently was. Although Very High Leader was very young right now, and his practice was not very strong, he still should not have been so emotionless. I am not here to tell you off, God coldly said. I am here to ask you if you want the sky and men combined together's big love, or small love, and small relationships between men and women. These two do not contradict each other, Hansen said. You can have both. Very High Leader's face was pale as he asked, who are you people? If you do not speak clearly, I am going to be rude to you guys. Upon hearing all of this, the butterfly lady was angry. She coldly shouted, you can tell that they are both no good for anybody. Allow me to take them down and ask them. After that, the butterfly lady waved her hand. Many substance chains flashed like a halo. They were headed toward Hansen and God. Hansen teleported and dodged them. God did not avoid them. It allowed the halo to tie it up. It did not struggle. After the ring was pulled, God fell to the ground with it. God fell to the ground, but still looked cold. It did not look at the butterfly lady. God instead looked at the Very High Leader and said, with sky and men combined together, the Very High will be free. Are you really going to give this up on behalf of the butterfly lady? What do you know about sky and men combined together, and the Very High's freedom? Very High Leader's face looked a bit disdainful. Very high supremacy and extremely quiet path. Without me, without. God was vaguely talking about some deep skills. Hansen thought those sentences could be related to Very High sense. Even so, he did not actually understand what any of it meant. After all, he had not practiced Very High sense. How do you know all this? Very High Leader looked at God with a look that screamed disbelief. I know more than just that, God said with a smile. I know the extreme levels of sky and men combined together. If you want, I can tell you. Very High Leader looked at God and asked, do you really know sky and men combined together at an extreme level? He was half confused and half untrusting. Hansen thought things were going terrible for him, but he could not think of a way to stop God. It did not matter how much of a rush he was in. He could not just go blocking Very High Leader's eyes and ears, and tell him not to listen or look. Hansen's brain was spinning fast. He was thinking about what God was trying to do, and how to stop God's conspiracy. God only spoke a few sentences about sky and men combined together, at an extreme level, and he had already made Very High Leader overwhelmed and obsessed. When God spoke about the most important aspect, it stopped. Very High Leader was into it so much, but now God had suddenly stopped. He quickly asked, why have you stopped talking? I am talking about the universe's greater path, and you are just drowning in small relationships and small love. My path does not suit you. God shook its head as it spoke. Hansen now understood what God was trying to do, but he did not think God's method was going to work. His heart flashed with countless possibilities. He was thinking about how best to react to this. He did not speak. He was still waiting to see how this played out. How do you know if this will not suit me if we do not try? Very High Leader looked a bit mad as he spoke. If you are really looking for the path, it is easily found. God looked at the butterfly lady and said, kill her. Kill her, and I will teach you the extreme levels of sky and men combined together. The butterfly lady was enraged. She used a halo to tighten God's body. No matter how much it tightened, it could not harm God's body. Hansen noticed that Very High Leader remained silent. He did not think this was good. Oh no. The personality of the Very High is not normal. They practice Very High sense, so the way they think is different from ordinary creatures. It looks like Very High Leader really wanted God's sky, and men combined together's teaching, at an extreme level. Maybe he really will kill Butterfly Lady. Hansen knew it was now impossible to convince the Very High Leader. When he made his mind up, there was no point in Hansen saying anything. Hansen did not go and convince Very High Leader. He turned to God and asked, do you really know sky and men combined together at an extreme level? He knew only beating God would suggest to very high leader that he should not be swayed by the intruder. Of course I never lie, God solemnly said. I do not believe you. You are not one of the very high, so how could you know very high sky and men combined together? You should show us right now. Otherwise I do not believe you, and he will not believe you either. Han's son had to stall God and make sure the very high leader did not make a decision just yet. These two guys are very evil. I will kill them. The butterfly lady was very mad at Han's son and God about the things they had been saying. She wanted to fight again. There is no rush. Let's have a look first. Very high leader pulled the butterfly lady back. This shocked the butterfly lady. Are you going to do what they say? Would you kill me to get the sky and men combined together at an extreme level? The butterfly lady looked at the very high leader madly as she spoke. Of course not, very high leader immediately said. I just want to find out if this person knows about sky and men combined together at an extreme level. After it is performed, I will kill them. Chapter 28:31 Fell into the trap. God looked at Han's son, laughed, and said, If you want to learn, I can teach you as well. It depends on how extreme this extreme level is, Han's son calmly said. I need to know if it is worth learning. You will have to listen up and not miss out on anything, God said. Do not take it out on me if you are unable to learn anything. God then started to talk about sky and men combined together at an extreme level. This was different from earlier. This time, God explained it all in a very detailed manner. It analyzed every word and every sentence for Han's son's ears. As God explained, it did not avoid the presence of the very high leader. He and the butterfly lady were able to hear it all as well. What is God planning to accomplish? Now he is talking about the extreme levels. Why would very high leader still want to kill the butterfly lady after hearing it all? Han's son was confused. He was soon put into shock. Oh no! Does this mean he is lying to the very high leader? Is the actual thing that can be a killer be the extreme levels itself? Perhaps this has nothing to do with the sky and men combined together skill. And it is just a Geno art that has the power of temptation and control very high leader, and gets him to kill the butterfly lady? Hansen quickly tried listening to God's explanation. After listening for a while, he noticed that it really was a tricky Geno art. It had the same effect as the very high sense. There was a connection with the Dongxian Sutra and Under the Sky Knife, both of which Han's son had practiced. Hearing God's explanation was a benefit for Han's son too. He used to have some elements he did not understand, but now he understood it all. Is what God is talking about true? Han's son really did not understand. God had already told him, and very high leader, what they wanted to hear. What other trump cards could God have? God got up from the floor and made a very deep Geno art as simple as could be. It made it so anyone could understand. God did not hold back anything. It explained sky and men combined together's extreme level path, as crystal clear as one could. The analysis was so clear that even Han's son, who had never practiced very high sense before, already knew what to do with it. After hearing it all, very high leader looked as if he understood a lot. He looked very happy. Clearly, he had learned a lot due to God's explanation. It was like he had sorted out many of the issues he used to have. This skill just sounds ordinary and not special, Hansen said. I have just casually listened to it and have already learned it. Oh, then you should perform it once and see if you have learned it, God coldly said. This skill is not hard for me. Performing it once can prove this Geno art is not worth the very high leader killing the butterfly lady. Wait. Hansen's face changed. He did not perform it how God said. He looked at very high leader and finally understood what God meant. Damn it! Was I a part of his entire scheme? If I learned extreme level skill, and very high leader did not, that would mean he believes what God said before. If he really thought it was the butterfly lady that stopped him from learning the extreme level skill, that means Hansen's brain was spinning. He was thinking about how best he could resolve this situation. God seemed to know what Hansen was thinking and said, Your heart has big love. Practicing sky and men combined together at an extreme level is not hard. Other people can never learn it like you. After hearing God say that, Hansen knew things weren't going according to plan. I do not think so. Very high leader stepped forward and coldly said, I understand your sky and men combined together at an extreme level. It is not that hard. Did you really learn it? It looked like God was smiling while speaking, but God was not smiling. Very high leader's lips lifted. His body had some weird swirl. It was like his entire body had combined with space and was part of the universe. Han Sen had never seen someone who could combine with it so perfectly. Between grass, wood, a mountain, and stone, it was like he was a part of them from the beginning. Blurg. Suddenly, very high leader coughed up some blood. He fell out of sky and men combined together at an extreme level. Very high leader sounded like he could not accept this result. He stared at God and shouted as he asked, Why? I already understand the extreme levels you taught me. Why am I still being removed from the extreme level of practice? I told you that right now. You are not suitable for this road, God coldly said. I do not believe this, very high leader said as he wiped the blood from his mouth. The extreme level skills you have spoken about must be wrong. God looked at Han Sen and suggested, To see if it is wrong, why do you not just go and ask him? Very high leader stared at Han Sen as he said, Show me the extreme level skills you have just learned. Han Sen frowned. He knew he had fallen into God's trap and was now a chess piece in his game. If Han Sen did not perform it or said he had not learned it, very high leader might not believe him. It would be suspicious. If he performed it and it worked, that meant he would do what God wanted. Very powerful guy. God put out everything so clearly, but still made everyone fall into ulterior schemes. Han Sen already knew he had failed halfway. No matter how he performed or not, the very high leader's heart was already ensnared and fixated with all of this. God looked at Han Sen with interest. It seemed to have enjoyed the fact Han Sen was all tangled up inside. Its eyes flickered with a weird light. It was like God was saying, How would you choose? Okay, I will show you once, Han Sen said with a nod. After that, some weird waves appeared on Han Sen's body. It looked like very high leader in the past. His whole body had combined with the entire area around him. It was like he had become the sky and the ground, and he could not be apart from it. That was just sky and men combined together skills. The real extreme level was where very high leader failed. Han Sen did not move. He felt as if his body suddenly changed. All the substances around him, the wood, grass, mountains, and stones, seemed to have heard Han Sen's summoning. They all roared. The entire Goliath star tree began to shiver and shake. The tree full of star fruit was leaning toward Han Senator. It was like it was going to leave the soil and go to Han Senator. Even the big mountains around were making some groans that echoed. It was like they were answering Han Sen's summons. Did it work? Very high leader's face looked shocked. He had stared at Han Sen since the beginning. He had done exactly the same thing as Han Sen, but Han Sen had succeeded where he had failed. How did he do that? Very high leader's face did not look good. God's face looked surprised too. He knew Han Sen had already seen through his plan. He thought Han Sen would say he had not learned it, and perhaps perform a trick while casting it to deliberately fail. But Han Sen did not do that. He had performed it successfully and worked hard. It worked better than God expected it to. God squinted his eyes and looked at Han Senator. Did he already give up? It does not seem like it. He does not seem like a guy who would give up easily. Clearly, God wanted to find out what Han Sen was going to do next. Han Sen's eyes looked a bit cold as he thought, I have already fallen into God's trap. It is impossible to get out now. And the knotted heart very high leader is still in turmoil. No matter what I do, it will not go away. In that case, I must make his heart knot bigger. 2832 You are not qualified enough. Do you know why you are not able to practice it, but I can practice it? Han Sen looked at the very high leader. The very high leader looked at Han Sen and asked why. That was what he was wondering too. It is because you are not qualified enough, Han Sen casually said. I am not qualified enough? When the very high leader heard those 5 words, he froze. Ever since he was young, it did not matter if it was a family member or a senior in the family. They kept on complimenting how great he was. No one had ever dared to say he was not qualified enough. He never heard those 5 words said to him before. That is correct, Han Sen said with certainty. It is because you are not qualified enough. That is why you cannot learn it, and I can just learn it on a whim. Han Sen did not want to see the very high leader thinking he had failed his practice, because he was in love, which would result in him possibly killing the woman. Ordinary people might not do that, but Han Sen was not sure about the people of the very high. So, he had to change the tracks for the train of thought running in the very high leader's head. He could not let him think that his failure was due to the butterfly lady. Han Sen needed to make him know that he had failed due to his own abilities. If he believed that, he would have no reason to kill the butterfly lady. That meant God's trick would fail. The very high leader coldly said, "Although I do not think I am some genius of the best generation, I do not permit anyone to call me bad." "In that case, it depends on who you are competing with," Han Sen said. "If you are only competing with the dumbass next door, it does not matter how good people say you are. That would just mean you are the best out of a horde of pigs. How do I compare to you then?" The very high leader raised his eyebrows. There are only two words to describe this. Absolutely terrible. Han Sen was going to attack the very high leader. He wanted to make him believe that it really was all his fault. The very high leader was still too young. His very high sense wasn't working very well at his age. Han Sen provoked him and made him want to win. The very high leader did not care for what Han Sen said. He looked at Han Sen and said, "You have only learned one Geno art faster than me. Have you not spoken too soon? It is not just a Geno art. It looks like it is a Geno art that you can never learn. But for me it is easy. It is a matter of talent. A Geno art that might take you a year to practice would only take me a second." Han Sen looked at the very high leader with disdain. "Mister, I think you are bluffing a bit too much." The very high leader thought Han Sen was ridiculous. He did not believe him. "If you do not believe me, select a Geno art that you think is hard to learn. You only need to show me once. There is no need to teach me. I will show you the difference between a true genius and a commoner." Han Sen spoke all of his words with powerful confidence. The very high leader was completely enraged by what Han Sen told him. His face turned cold as he said, "Sure. I am keen to see just how much of a genius you are." God watched these two people with interest, but did not stop Han Sen or the others from arguing. The very high leader thought for a while. He finally put out 5 of his fingers. A blurry rainbow-colored ball of light was in his hand. He looked at Han Sen and said, "This is a Geno art called 7 Light. It is a beginner Geno art. Do I need to teach you that?" "No." Han Sen looked at the blurry ball of light and cast his Dongxian Sutra. Countless universal cogwheels spun around in Han Sen's eyeballs. "It really is just a beginner Geno art," Han Sen said with a look of disdain. "It is a bit too easy. Why don't you swap it for one with greater difficulty?" "You should learn this one first," the very high leader coldly said. "It won't be too late to learn the other ones later." Although it was just a beginner Geno art, 7 Light Geno art was a difficult one to train with. Sometimes even butterfly or true god class elites could not make use of it. The 7 Light Geno art was difficult because it required 7 different powers that combined into one. Ordinary creatures did not have 7 element powers to command. Even a true god elite who did not have many different elemental powers could not make use of 7 Light. In the universe at large, it was rare to see a creature with more than one element at its command. 3 elements were as rare as a phoenix feather or a Kirin scale. 7 element people were so rare that no one had heard about them. The very high had a special skill to practice 7 Light, but they did not actually carry 7 elements. "Go and change it." Han Sen randomly waved his hand, which presented a blurry rainbow-colored ball of light. It was the same as the very high leader's 7 Light. The very high leader was shocked. He stared at Han Senator. He wanted to know if his 7 Light was a true one. Some xenogeniacs that were good at playing tricks were able to perform illusions that looked fairly authentic. Han Sen could tell what the very high leader was thinking. Han Sen waved his hand and cast 7 Light on the very high leader. The very high leader cast the 7 Light from his hand too. Boom! 2 7 Lights hit each other in the air and exploded. The rainbow halo exploded like a sun. It was so bright that no one could see momentarily. It took a while for things to go back to normal. It really is 7 Light. The very high leader looked conflicted. He remembered that when he was small, it took him a whole week to practice 7 light. He broke the record for the very high, and his father even complimented him. That was a rare thing. Now Han's son had only seen it once. He did not have to read a book, study, or toil over learning it. He could not believe it. Maybe he had already learned 7 light before. That was what the very high leader wanted to believe. He said to Han's son, "If you think 7 light is too easy, then allow me to present something even harder." That was what I was trying to tell you earlier. Han's son smiled at him. It did not really matter what Geno art the very high leader presented to Han's senator, as long as one was displayed. Han's son could analyze and simulate it with his Dongxian Sutra. The very high leader was primitive class, but Han's son was larva class. Simulating his skills was far easier. Although it was not 100% accurate, reaching 80 or 90% was expected each time. The very high leader thought, "These two people are very weird. I do not know where these xenogeneics came from, but it looks like they know a lot about the very high. If I use a very high Geno art, he might have learned it before." Suddenly, the very high leader's eyes turned bright. He looked at the butterfly lady and said, "Butterfly lady, please show him your butterfly shadow. Let him see." Butterfly shadow was a Geno art that only the butterfly lady knew. There were no similar Geno arts in the very high, so he did not believe Han's son could learn it. The butterfly lady listened to the very high leader. She immediately cast butterfly shadow and emitted a sky full of butterflies. They were like countless petals. Should I tell you that the butterfly lady's butterfly shadow, you? Before the very high leader finished his sentence, Han's son waved his hand. He also emitted a sky full of butterflies, just like the butterfly lady's butterfly shadow. "How is that possible?" screamed the butterfly lady and the very high leader at the same time. It was hard to believe. 2833 The same skill that wouldn't lose twice. Fortunately, this is just a 20-year-old very high leader. If it was the very high leader of the present, it would not be so easy to trick him. Han's son felt a modicum of relief, which led him to sigh. Very high leader stared at Han's son and asked, "Can you really learn Geno arts from just a glance?" "Not quite," Han's son casually said. "Some of the more difficult Geno arts require me to spend some time researching. Simple Geno arts like those I can learn on a whim." Simple? Very high leader could not determine what that meant. Very high leader had a strange expression as he asked, "For you, mister, what is a Geno art that is hard?" "Like your race's very high sense," Han's son said. "That is a very difficult Geno art." Very high leader felt more comfortable hearing that. At least the very high had one Geno art that commanded the man's respect. Then, Han's son added another sentence. "If there is a way, I can practice it in 10 days to half a month." After Han's son said that, very high leader could not help but feel angry. He coldly asked, "Do you really think you can learn very high sense in 10 days or half a month?" "I suppose so. Anyway, it would not take me any longer than a month." Han's son looked at him with much disdain. Fine. Let's do very high sense. I have a very high sense Geno art here. I will give you the instructions. If you can practice it within a month, you can do anything to me." Very high leader was angry. "Sure. That sounds like a good deal." Han's son agreed to the bet, which made him more than pleased. For Han's son, very high sense was something he could only simulate 30% to 40%. A high-class Geno art like that was really difficult to simulate. Learning very high sense within a month was impossible. That sort of bet was one that Han's son was going to lose. But he did not mind winning or losing that bet. With this bet, and the few hours that remained, very high leader would not kill the butterfly lady. That meant Han's son would win his bet with God. That was the result he ultimately wanted. Very high leader was furious. He brought out a Geno art. It was a Geno art that came with very high sense. It required very high sense as a base for it. Otherwise, one was unable to learn it. Han's son was not able to learn it with ease. But he did not plan on learning it. He only needed very high leader to not kill the butterfly lady for the rest of the day. God observed this very interesting turn of events, but was not going to stop it. When Han's son and the very high leader struck this bet, God smiled and said, Your skill at turning the tables is something quite magical. If this was the first time I had seen this, you might have won. It is a shame that someone already tried making use of the same trick before you. I am not going to lose to this same trick a second time. Who did this last time? Was it Han Jingzi? Han Sun asked with curiosity. It was not Han Jingji. It was that guy from Sacred. He was just like you. I thought I was already going to win because I pushed him into a losing position. But he knew how to turn the tables the same way you did. He went along with what happened. By doing so, he reversed the entire thing. It looked like God was trying to remember what happened. A small smile formed on its mouth as it said, "But you are too unlucky. You were not the first person to use this sort of trick before me. Therefore, I suspect you are going to lose. We have not even had a result yet. How do you think I will end up losing?" After saying that, Han Sun felt a chill. You are right. It is not the end yet. Perhaps you will lose too. God nodded with seriousness. It sounded as if it was apologizing for what it said. Han Sun didn't speak. He pretended to study the Geno art that very high leader gave him. He wanted to know what kind of trick God could perform to promote a turnabout. Han Sun didn't know if very high leader would kill the butterfly lady. But over the next few hours, he probably had no intention of killing her. God did not do anything special to incite or lure very high leader. God merely started reading very high sense. Very high leader heard it for a while. Eventually, his face changed to one of rage. He asked, "Where did you steal very high sense off my race? You are going to kill me anyway. Does it matter where I stole it from? I do have a few questions, and I am hoping you can help me." Before very high leader could respond, God went on to say, "Very high sense features a sentence that reads, 'Forget myself, and I will become everyone.' What does that mean?" "This is a secret of my race," very high leader coldly said. "How could I tell you that?" God did not mind and kept talking. "From what I can understand, regarding forgetting myself, it is not really about forgetting yourself. It is like a give and take sort of thing. When facing benefits, we use our benefits to help others. We use our hearts to treat others nicely. That way they will all treat you like family. That is why there is a saying like, 'Forget myself, and I will become everyone.' No. If the other side only comes close because of benefits, even if they treat you like family, it does not really count for you." Very high leader tried to object. "I see. Then, how about whatever possibility is true? How do you explain that?" God did not talk about the butterfly lady. He spoke about very high sense with very high leader. God was just going to teach. But the question he had was that same as very high leader. He could not help but object to God. As they were both talking, very high leader had many inspirations. There were many things he did not understand, but he was now able to understand it all. His mind had improved. Han Sun felt terrible. He thought he had found a decent plan to stall very high leader from doing anything brash. But very high leader was becoming inspired by God. His very high sense had become stronger, and he understood the world far more. He had become smarter, or he had become less and less human. He only followed the rules to do things now, so it was hard to make sure he would not kill the butterfly lady. Han Sun did not understand what very high forget love meant. But everyone knew the very high did not possess the capacity for love. They could abandon their bodies to combine with the universe. What else could they give up? While he was talking to God, very high leader looked more and more serious. His eyes looked very calm. Han Sun was worried. What can I do? Han Sun was suddenly unable to find a way to overcome this. Everything God said followed some sort of rule. It made Han Sun feel as if he was in a lot of trouble. It was like rowing a boat upstream. Nothing was going well. Han Sun understood that it was because God could control the rules of the world and the hearts of the people. Fighting it face to face was impossible. God could not be beaten. Han Sun looked at the butterfly lady. He was thinking of something. So, I need to use my sword and fight tooth and nail to save this situation. Chapter 28:34 Lucky Gamble? God seemed to understand what Han Sun was thinking and coldly said, "It is futile. Have you heard of representing general trends? The general means nature, like how fire does not have a shape. You cannot see the wind. Water can flow. Every substance has its own nature. Once you catch that nature, whatever chances come will never leave it. It seems like there are a lot of changes, but in the end, it will always return to its nature. Hansen knew what God was saying. It meant Very High Leader was originally an emotionless person. No matter what Hansen did, he could not change who he was. He also could not change the situation they were in. How do you know if he is fire or wind or water? Hansen did not agree with what God was saying. He turned his eyes, looked at God, and noticed Very High Leader, who was next to God, was petrified. His body had a rhythm. It was like his entire body was connected to the sky, ground, and universe. Actually, one could say they were combined. It seemed like Very High Leader had become a part of the universe. He was a part of the universe's machine. The feeling was increasing. It made Very High Leader's presence become colder and colder. It was like he was not a sensitive creature of high intelligence. He was just a cold machine. Surprisingly, God did not object to what Hansen said, and said something that could mean two things. I want to know if he is fire, wind, or water too. Hansen did not understand what God meant, but it seemed as if Very High Leader understood him. His very high sense mind had become stronger. It kept increasing over a short time. He was almost as strong as a butterfly deified now. Although it was just his mind increasing, his body was still primitive class. It was still enough for his heart to change. Hansen thought, even Very High Leader has reached very high forget love level. There is no need for him to keep the butterfly lady around. Plus, he cannot defeat the butterfly lady. Although Hansen had a way that could enable him to get things over with, and in the entire bet, with God near, that method was difficult to achieve. It does not matter how much you think. Why don't you just gamble with your luck? Sit back and see if he is fire, water, or wind. God smiled at Hansen as he spoke. Could you at least tell me what the original ending was like? Hansen asked God. If he chose the small love and the small relationship, how could he end up becoming the leader of the Very High? You should have known that, God said. Hansen nodded. In fact, he had already guessed this. He still thought Very High Leader would not kill the butterfly lady so soon. But things were always unpredictable. This was now a gamble that hinged on his luck. No, you cannot gamble with luck. To use luck when gambling against God, even if I gambled 10,000 times, I would not win once. I need to find a strategy that can ensure my victory. Hansen's brain spun fast. He could not think of a way in a short amount of time. With God near, using force would not work. But he was not God, so he could not control the wills and the ways of someone's heart. That was much harder for him to win. Hansen wanted to question him, so he asked, "Can you tell me how Han Jingji won?" God went silent for a moment but surprisingly said, "He did not do anything. He only made the right choice. Therefore he won." So, you are saying he won a gamble through luck? Hansen did not believe that. God nodded and said, "It really was that way." Hansen did not believe that was how Han Jingji won. He thought this might be God trying to lure him in and gamble via his luck. What did you guys gamble on before? Were you also judging a creature's fate? Hansen asked. He was trying to gather more information. Not just one, God replied. There were 11. Hansen's heart jumped. 11? That number is very close to the number of people there were on the 7th team. Does that mean? Hansen held the excitement in his heart. He smiled and said, "You guys were able to gamble like that. If I knew we could gamble like that, I would have selected a few more. It would have given me more chances to win." God shook its head and said, "We gambled 11 rounds. If he lost one round, he was to become my slave. But he did not lose a single round." Han Jingji won 11 rounds? What did you guys gamble about? How could he win so easily? Hansen asked with shock. He could not imagine Han Jingji winning 11 rounds against God. Hansen was having a hard enough time beating God once. "We gambled that 11 humans would make a wish to me," God said. He said 10 people would make a wish and 1 would not. He was correct. Only 1 human he chose did not make a wish to me. It did not sound like God was ashamed of losing the bet. Hansen's heart was jumping like it was insane. That is right. They must have been the people from the 7th team. The one who did not make a wish was Gu Qingcheng. Hansen still could not imagine how Han Jingji was able to guess those wishes. Who would make a wish? And who would not make a wish? According to the theory, if Han Jingji guessed the people who would make a wish, God would not try and tempt them. Regarding the person Han Jingji thought would not make a wish, God would try and tempt them. In this situation, Han Jingji guessed them all correctly. That was too weird. Han Sun remembered the Ning family's second father used to say that Han Jingji told him not to make a wish, but second father still made a wish. How did Han Jingji guess that? While Han Sun was talking to God, Very High Leader's eyes opened wide. This time Very High Leader was like a completely different person. Although his face and body did not look different, and his power had not increased, his presence felt totally different. It made him look like a completely different person. Every movement of the Very High made Han Sun feel weird. It was like he had seen this somewhere before, but it was not the same. Suddenly, Han Sun was shocked. This presence? Why does it look like the guy who calls himself God? Hm. Aside from this God in front of me, he looks like the guy called Qing Jun. Han Sun was checking out Very High Leader. They looked so similar, but it was just the presence that was similar. There was a difference. If Very High Sense is practiced to mastery, do people become like those gods? Han Sun guessed. I think that must be right. Every elite of a race that goes into the Geno Hall becomes like those gods. Han Sun was still thinking when Very High Leader looked at him and said, "The gamble between us has finished here. I will take it as a loss." When Han Sun heard that, he knew Very High Leader had already escaped the mental struggle he had found himself in. After saying that, Very High Leader walked over to the butterfly lady. Chapter 28:35 Love Butterfly. Han Sun felt terrible. At this time, Very High Leader's mind has reached very high forget love level. If he really wants to achieve sky and men combined together, does he have to cut off all other thoughts? Will he kill the butterfly lady? Although Han Sun knew things were not going well, he had no other choice. With God there, he couldn't stop Very High Leader. Will I have to become a slave for a century? Han Sun's brain quickly spun. He hoped to find a chance. The butterfly lady saw that Very High Leader was no longer looking like he was in his right mind. She sadly looked at him and said, "Are you really going to kill me?" Very High Leader shook his head. "I have already learned the secrets of Very High Forget Love. Through the flow of time, favor, grudges, and love are not enough to leave a mark in my heart. From now on, there will be no more connection between you and me. We are just strangers. Go. The sky is big, and the ground is big. You will always find somewhere else to be in outer sky." Han Sun was shocked. He thought he had underestimated Very High Leader. He now understood. He did get the secrets of Very High Sense, but at a deeper level than Han Sun presumed. He really did let go of all else. Even the butterfly lady could not keep him there. Am I that lucky? Did I just win the bet? Han Sun did not believe God would let him win the bet that easily. He looked at God. He saw God was still watching on with interest. It was not going to stop what was happening. It was like nothing mattered to it, and it was merely there to watch. Han Sun tested him by asking, "Are you not going to convince him?" "No. Everything is going according to plan. I just hope the story will not be disappointing." God was speaking to Han Sun, but kept watching Very High Leader and the butterfly lady. God was like a young man watching a sad drama, and was going to get emotional by simply watching. Han Sun saw God was looking like he was not going to do anything, but he thought he would win. So he looked at Very High Leader and the butterfly lady. He tried to find out why God was feeling so confident. Very High Leader did not want to kill. He treated the butterfly lady like a stranger. He said what he had to and got ready to leave. Suddenly, the butterfly lady laughed very loudly. That laugh was very spiking to the eardrums. Han Sun felt itchy by just hearing her. His skin flared with a bevy of goosebumps. Seeing the butterfly lady spread her wings, she looked into the sky and laughed sharply. The substance chains on her were like countless butterfly shadows. They surrounded her. It was like a butterfly of death coming at them from the underworld. "Are you leaving just like that?" The butterfly lady ceased smiling. Her eyes had a scary light. She was confronting Very High Leader. "You should learn to let go and move on," Very High Leader coldly said. His heart did not seem to contain the compassion it once did. No matter what the butterfly lady did, she could not make him feel anything. The butterfly lady pointed at Very High Leader and shouted, "You said it like it was so easy. Have you spared a moment to think about me? Those of the love butterfly mate for life. If we get abandoned by our spouse, we have to die alone. If you just dump me like this, what is the difference between that and killing me?" Hansen finally understood why God was feeling so confident. God's target from the very beginning was not Very High Leader. It was the butterfly lady. Hansen thought about how things had been developing. The butterfly lady had been forced to this level. She was a part of everything that was going on. My practice really was not enough. I have been tricked by God ever since the beginning. I never did one up over God's plans. Hansen knew that he had sorely lost this time. But the butterfly lady was still alive. There was still a chance for him to turn the tables. Although it would be difficult, a chance was a chance. "Sorry," Very High Leader coldly said. His apology made the butterfly lady even more enraged. The butterfly lady screeched and asked, "If I am dying anyway, why should I die alone? I should have you die with me. Let's see how you will truly leave me." The butterfly lady's face looked crazy. Her butterfly shadow was like the shadow of a reaper's scythe headed for Very High Leader. The butterfly-class butterfly lady was powerful. Although Very High Leader had learned Very High Sense's secrets, his power was still primitive. He couldn't fight against the butterfly-class butterfly lady. It was just a reflection, but Very High Leader's body had been dealt with many cuts that were scary to see. They were given by the butterfly shadow. God blood came out of his wounds. If Very High Leader is murdered, does that mean you lose? Hansen asked God. Yes. God nodded and continued looking at Very High Leader and butterfly lady fighting with interest. Then, aren't you going to save him? Hansen attempted asking. He wanted to know what God was currently calculating to see Very High Leader be able to kill the butterfly lady. There is no need, God coldly said. Life and death should just be let be. I have done my part. The choices made are now theirs to create. Hansen couldn't find out anything. He looked at the battleground, thinking about how Very High Leader was going to defeat the butterfly lady. No matter how he viewed matters, the butterfly lady was suppressing Very High Leader. He wasn't standing a chance. The butterfly lady's power was very unique. She was not like an ordinary xenogeniac. Her powers contained death elements and emotional elements. And her geno-arts were also very weird. Even if Hansen fought her, he was not sure if he would be able to kill her. Very High Leader was only 20 years, and had just become primitive. He couldn't defeat the butterfly lady. He might have ended up being killed by the butterfly lady. Many butterfly shadows riddled Very High Leader's body with lesions. Even when using Very High Sense at its best, he was unable to block the butterfly lady's power. Very High Leader tried teleporting. When he teleported, his body was hit by the butterfly shadow. He dropped out of teleporting. The butterfly shadows that kept appearing and disappearing were like the death butterflies everywhere harvesting lives. They were surrounding Very High Leader, and they kept cutting up his body. Pang! Very High Leader's body hit a branch of the star tree. God blood spilled from out of his mouth. The god blood that had been bleeding dyed his armor red. He was half sitting and half leaning against the star tree. Very High Leader looked as if he was dying. Now come back to me, and I might still let you live. I can spare your life. The butterfly lady was in front of the Very High Leader. Death butterflies surrounded her. They were creating a weird butterfly path that led to the underworld. If Very High Leader said no, it seemed as if Very High Leader would go to that underworld that no life could enter. I have already told you that you and I are mere strangers now, Very High Leader said while wiping the blood from his mouth. He spoke coldly while sitting against the star tree. Then, you and I should die together. The butterfly lady moved her body. The death butterflies were everywhere. They were going to the Very High Leader, who could no longer battle. Chapter 2836. A butterfly that can only have one relationship in their entire life. The sky, full of deathly butterfly shadows, was like an underworld river flooding toward Very High Leader. They peeled off his flesh. Even his god body could not withstand the butterfly shadow's power. His entire body up and down had been ravished to display the bones inside. Hansen was not happy about this. Clearly, things could not be over that simple. God had planned for every twist and turn, and would not lose the bet on this seemingly expected outcome. Blurg. God blood was dyeing the whole land red. Seeing very high leader was about to become a pile of bones, the butterfly lady suddenly spat out her own torrent of god blood. It looked like she had been heavily damaged. The sky full of butterfly shadows was now gone. Han-sun was not surprised. He quietly looked at the butterfly lady, wanting to see what had happened. The butterfly lady seemed to be suffering vast amounts of pain. She generated a butterfly shadow to cut very high leader's body. Every time the butterfly shadow cut very high leader, the butterfly lady herself was bleeding as well. Her damage was just as much as the damage very high leader was taking. Very high leader's body had almost become a skeleton that had no flesh on it. His face still didn't change. He looked at the butterfly lady and said, "You are a love butterfly. A butterfly will only fall in love once in their entire life. That contract has you bound to me already. That means we will live and die together. Hurting me means hurting yourself too. Why are you doing this? As I said, if you are going to dump me, we can both go to hell." The butterfly lady looked terrible as she spoke. Her expression was determined but weird. There was no other way for her to proceed. Many butterfly shadows flew over the very high leader. They sliced and diced what remained of very high leader's body. The blood in the butterfly lady's mouth was spilling out with less control as time went by. She was looking worse and worse. It looked as if her injuries were no better than very high leader. A butterfly can only have one relationship in their entire life, huh? I do not know if I should be sad or instead admire the loyalty and determination of one who can commit for so long. God was getting very emotional by watching the two, who were in love but killing each other. It sighed and said, "This is sadder than anything else." Han-sun was thinking, "Weren't you the one to make this happen?" God seemed to know what Han-sun was thinking and seriously said, "This was still entirely their decision. I only gave them the options of how to proceed. They could have selected a better ending, but it is a shame they had to choose the most upsetting route. But because of that, life becomes more meaningful. Life without love and hatred is very boring." God continued to sigh. "That is just what you think," Han-sun said. "I am pretty sure most people just want their life to be comfortable and without excitement. They don't want the drama and heartbreak of complex love." God looked at Han-sun and asked, "Is that it? According to what you are saying, you only have to find a random and rare system. With your power, you can control everything and live your life safely. If that was true, why must you go everywhere you can to experience as much danger as possible?" Han-sun was suddenly speechless. He did not know how to answer that. Life is pretty because of greed, and love, hatred, and relationships are the prettiest flowers of the tree of greed. Watching it now, the most beautiful sad flower is soon to open. That is very rare. You should just remain focused and admire it. God focused its attention on very high leader and the butterfly lady, who were in the middle of loving each other and killing each other. God's face looked serious. It was like it was watching the ending of a very sad movie. Han-sun did not have time to focus on God. Otherwise, he would end up watching tears fall from God's eyes. God seemed to be very touched by the unfolding tragedy. What to do? The butterfly lady and very high leader are going to end up killing themselves. According to the wager, the butterfly lady will be dying because of very high leader. That means I will lose the bet. Han-sun's heart flashed through many thoughts. He was trying to think of how to stop very high leader and the butterfly lady from dying together. Seeing the butterfly lady's face, she seemed determined to die with very high leader. She was throwing her life away, and Han-sun did not know how to make her stop. At this time, Han-sun did not care much anymore. His body had a substance God liked. He was going to stop the butterfly lady. He was not going to do anything that had her die with very high leader. Han-sun used all of his power to teleport over there. Before his body did that, he felt as if his body had been restricted by some invisible power. He could not go further than half a step. "That is the stage," God coldly said. "Stay in the audience seats and watch the action unfold. It is quite a remarkable tragedy. It is beautiful. It is art. How could you think of destroying it?" Although Han-sun knew God would not permit him to interfere, at this time, he still felt very sad. Seeing that the butterfly lady and very high leader were severely injured, it wouldn't be long before they died together. Although Han's son could not move his body, he did not want to give up just yet. He shouted at the butterfly lady, "Butterfly lady, it does not matter if you hate or love him, but if he treats you like this and you treat him like that, don't you think you are being too nice?" The butterfly lady was almost insane. Aside from very high leader, it seemed as if she could not see or hear anything. Seeing the butterfly lady not move, Han's son continued to shout, "Look at him now. Does it look like he regrets what he has done? He does not know your pain. He does not know that your pain is worse than death. If you kill him now, that means you are setting him free. Do you really want that?" The butterfly lady stopped. Her face was sad and pale as she looked back at Han's senator. She stared at Han's son and asked, "How can I make him suffer and die as painfully alone as I will?" Han's son saw the butterfly lady respond to him, and was happy. But he was holding it in not to answer immediately. He paused for a while and said, "In your heart, he is your favorite. The pain of having the favorite be taken away is something only you can feel right now. You must make him feel the same pain. Only then will it be as meaningful." "But I already mean nothing to him. How am I supposed to make him feel this pain?" The butterfly lady sounded full of hatred. "So if you were dead, it would not matter to him. You must take something away from him that he loves. Only then will he realize the pain he has caused you." Han's son tried to entice her. The butterfly lady's eyes turned bright. She stared at Han's son as she asked, "Do you know what he likes the most?" "Of course," Han's son said. "Of course I know. Isn't what he loves the most is what has taken him away from you?" "What?" The butterfly lady did not understand Han Sr. "He gave you up because he was looking for the path of sky and men combined together," Han's son said. "If you break the path he wants to pursue, wouldn't that make him feel more pain than death?" The butterfly lady gnashed her teeth as she asked, "Won't killing him sever that path?" No, no, no. If you kill him, he won't feel anything," Han's son said. "He needs to remain alive but without hope. He needs to feel as hopeless as you do now that you have been abandoned. Only then will he feel the pain." The butterfly lady's eyes turned bright as she asked, "How do I make him feel hopeless and full of pain?" 2837 Go to your home. Han's son knew that he had finally gotten through to the butterfly lady. He looked at God next to him. He saw God just sit there and watch like a member of the audience. God was not going to prohibit Han's son from trying. Han's son took a deep breath and said, "Stopping him is not that hard. You just need to destroy his geno-art and body. Take him with you and keep him alive. But throughout his whole life, do not allow him to practice again. Have him hover between life and death, where he can see his way forward, but cannot do anything to venture there. I am sure the pain he suffers will be as grand as yours. That way, you can relish in the pain he feels each and every day. Isn't that better than killing him?" Han's son knew this idea he devised would likely shackle him with a lot of bad karma. Given the circumstances, he did not care about that all that much. Allowing the very high to suffer was much better than letting himself become a slave for 100 years. When the butterfly lady heard Han's son, her eyes turned bright. She was almost insanely happy. Her teeth were chattering. She stared at the half-dead very high leader and laughed. "Not bad. I want to watch you suffer as bad as I have. I want you to suffer through torture and torment every day." While she was talking, the butterfly lady came before very high leader. She grabbed very high leader, who was now like a skeleton, not caring for the fact he had blood everywhere. She held him in her arms like a baby. She flapped her wings and flew into the mountains. "It looks like your plan failed." Han's son felt weird. God did not stop the butterfly lady from leaving. "Yes, you win," God said with a nod. Han's son was shocked. He looked at God for a while. The bet was not over yet. God could still perform one last twist of the knife. With God's mind, tricks, and powers, Han's son did not believe there was nothing more it could do. Han's son looked at God as he asked, "Aren't you even going to try? There is still more time." Of course, he was not trying to sway God. He was just worried about God having another conspiracy in the works. He didn't want the rug pulled from under him. God smiled. "There is no need. I want to watch and find out what the ending is. But there won't be enough time. So let's end it here." You win the bet. Can you give Wanner to me now? Han-sun asked. Of course. You go back first. I will stay here and watch the ending alone. God waved a hand. Han-sun felt the sky and the ground spin. He experienced another painful teleport. When his body returned to normal, he was already back upon God's farm. That God was so weird. It was willing to lose all because it wanted to watch the ending. But that is not a bad thing. Otherwise, I have no idea who would have ended up winning. Although Han-sun had won the bet, the pressure put upon him by God had not been reduced. In the past, when he was facing King, Empty God, and other scary god spirits, Han-sun did not feel so pressured. That weird-looking god, which did not look so scary, did not give him pressure. That was not because God's power was stronger than his. It was the invisible mental pressure. It was a natural reaction to feel when one subconsciously felt danger. So far, to make Han-sun feel this form of crisis, only God had been able to do it. Han-sun thought he might have to wait for a long time. After an hour, God returned and approached Han-sun with tears in its eyes. That fast? Did the butterfly lady go mad and kill very high leader? Han-sun was shocked. God seemed to know what Han-sun was thinking and said, I only fast-forwarded time. I went to watch their grim ending. You still won the bet. What was the end like? Han-sun asked with curiosity. You are not going to like it, God coldly said. It did not tell him the ending of the butterfly lady and very high leader's story. Han-sun looked at God, who had taken over Wanner's body, and asked, Now can you give Wanner back to me? Sure, God said with a nod. Where would you like to go? Let's go. What does that mean? Are you going to break the promise? Han-sun asked with a frown. If God was betraying the deal, there was nothing he could do about it. I only promised to give you Wanner. I never said I would exit her body. God smiled and spoke as if it was the one in the right. When Han-sun heard that, he froze. He knew he would not beat God with such word games. The most important thing was the simple fact that God had more power. The one who had more power was the one Han-sun could not beat. He could not properly object. Han-sun was going to stop talking. Taking a Wanner that had been taken over by God was worse than not bringing her back at all. It would only make Lone Bamboo even sadder. God seemed to know what Han-sun was thinking. He coldly said, I am planning to travel through the universe. So, how about this? You can be my tour guide. In 6 months, I will give you the complete Wanner. Han-sun's face did not look any better following that. Being with such a dangerous god for half a year made Han-sun unsure of how he might end up dead. Of course you could give her up, but that would be your decision to give up Wanner, God said. That would not be me breaking a promise. Han-sun gnashed his teeth. Sure. But no more bets over the next half a year while you're with me. And you cannot ask me to make wishes. Sure. God smiled and nodded. It did not waste time thinking. Han-sun looked at God with a complex look. He knew this was dangerous, but it was now the only way to save Wanner. With God's scary power, unless his power was enough to breach the Geno Hall, there was no other way for him to get Wanner back. This bet was only won through luck. It was the reason why he had won. If he had to do it again, Han-sun was not sure if he would win. Han-sun thought, how did Han Jingji beat him 11 times before? Let's go. Where are we going next? God looked at Han-sun with interest. Where would you like to go? Han-sun glumly asked. I will take you there. Your home. What God said made Han-sun's mouth drop open. He could not close it. Han-sun's mind flashed through many ideas. Is my home someplace you can go to? Even if I could, I would not take you there. That is like inviting a wolf into a room. No, that is not like inviting a wolf into a room. It is like inviting God into a room. Gods are much scarier than wolves, but where can I take him? My body cannot be an adult for much longer. I will be a child soon. Then it will be worse. In the past, Han-sun was worried that his body would become a child, but he did not change. He only noticed when he returned to God's farm that the time he came back was the same as the time when he went in. He was able to guess why he had not already turned into a child. Regarding why God came out late, Han-sun did not understand. Chapter 28:38 Geno God Lease in the Extreme King's Garden. Han-sun was sitting reading books. The lady who looked like Wanner was sitting nearby watching him. Han Sen's eyebrows noticeably rose. After a while of enduring the gaze, he could not help but ask Wanner, who was actually God in disguise, "Can you not look at me like that?" God had been looking at him for a long time. Even as a god, the being should have been tired of watching all of that. After agreeing to bring God home, Han Sen had no choice but to bring God to the Extreme King. God had also noticed the fact that Han Sen had become smaller. God smiled and said, "Only you are interesting here. If I don't stare at you, what else can I look at?" Extreme King elites are everywhere, such as Bai King and those elders. They are very interesting elites. Feel free to stare at them. Han Sen obscenely sold out the Extreme King. "I am tired of looking at them," God said. Han Sen was speechless. If Bai King learned someone had said that about him, he wondered what he would think. The universe is so big. Powerful nobles and xenogenics exist everywhere. You can go check them out. Han Sen felt sad as he spoke. "I am not invincible. It is not like I can watch whoever I want. I at least need to find some interesting creatures. Then, I can go see them," God patiently explained. Han Sen did not know what else to say, so he casually said, "If you like seeing other creatures that much, it would be nice if there was a Geno being scroll fight to watch. You could watch them all." When God heard what Han Sen said, it nodded and said, "Your suggestion is not bad. We can have another Geno being scroll fight, but the Geno being scroll fights are fairly boring. The creatures that fight aren't even God class. There should be a God fight instead." "Are you serious?" Han Sen looked at God with shock. Han Sen had never heard of the Geno being scroll opening on a whim. In the past, it was supposed to be once every 100 years, and the highest rank allowed in were kings. The last Geno being scroll bouts ended a few years ago. There was still a long time to go until 100 years had gone by. The Geno being scroll should not have been able to open again so soon. Yet God wanted there to be a Geno being scroll fight now, and one for beings that were God class. Han Sen really didn't believe it. If God could randomly start Geno being scroll fights, then why, in the past and across all of time, had nothing like this happened before? As a god, never lying is one of the most basic rules, God said. The being reached out a hand and brought a notebook out of nowhere. Then God started writing in it. Han Sen leaned his head over to take a gander at what was being written, but he noticed the paper in the notebook was blank. The pen was not writing down anything. While Han Sen was confused over what God hoped to do, he suddenly heard the thunder roll through space. Suddenly, the entire universe went dark. Every creature in the entire universe was shocked. The sky was pitch black. One could not even see their fingers. Suddenly a big boom sounded. He didn't know what was happening. Some low-life creatures that had not developed were madly running around. They did not know what was happening. They thought it was the end of the world. Suddenly there was a crack in space. An ancient temple appeared. It looked like the Geno Hall. It inched its way out of the crack. What is happening? Why has the Geno Hall suddenly appeared now? Did another god just die? But no way. I did not see another god's sadness. Did someone trigger a lantern fight? I don't think so. I do not see anyone triggering a lantern fight for ownership of a race lantern. Many deified elites across several different races were confused. They were looking at the Geno Hall, which was floating in space. This time, when the Geno Hall appeared, it was different from how it usually appeared. When the Geno Hall revealed itself completely, the gate slowly opened. The light inside the gates was very bright. People could only see bright, godly lights manifest from beyond the gate. One could not really see what was inside the God Hall. Inside that very bright godly light, something came out from the God Hall. When everyone clearly saw what it was, they were knocked into shock. It was a scroll. Is that the Geno being scroll? It does not quite look the same. The Geno being scroll fights happened a few years ago. Why is it happening again so soon? What is happening here? Bai King stood atop his god tower. He frowned and looked at the scroll unfurling in the sky. On an unknown small planet, an old man who was a fortune teller frowned while looking at the scroll. What the hell? Why would a Geno being scroll appear now? Inside the palace of a red dwarf star, there was a man who looked like a king. He was looking at the scroll in the sky with interest. Inside a black hole, the demon Alpha, who had been practicing with his eyes closed, suddenly opened them. He stared at the scroll in the sky. At the peak of Empty Mountain, a green-haired beast and a woman looked at this weird scene unfold with shock. The scroll slowly opened up. There was shiny text on it. No one was able to read the words, but every creature was somehow able to understand the meaning. Even the people from the undeveloped races were able to understand what the words meant. The feeling was like someone was standing aloft in space and reading it, but no one heard the sounds. A godly voice that could not be heard echoed throughout the universe. The Geno God list is open. All God-class creatures are eligible to join. The first 100 can be kept inside the Geno God list and be handsomely rewarded. Han's son was frozen. He could not believe that something he had randomly said could instigate universe-wide changes. When he saw the rewards, his heart jumped. That was especially true of the reward for those in the first place. If there were a chance, Han's son would fight for his life to claim that prize. Hansen thought, I believe that prize would tempt the deified elites of the entire universe. It was not just his heart that was jumping. Every deified elite in the entire universe was going crazy. The rest on the list did not matter much, but the first place reward was a god's personality. They could become god spirits. That was the dream of most deified elites. Unfortunately, entering the Geno Hall was too hard. Approximately 99% of true gods died while attempting to go in. No one dared to try to go in on a whim. Now they just needed to win first place in the latest fights to become god spirits. The difficulty had been significantly reduced. Even if people did not achieve the first place, the rewards behind it were still quite good. It made the elites who were not deified very tempted. Boom! Seeing the empty Geno God list shine, countless amounts of starlight flew across the universe. Hansen saw starlight come before him. It was an invitation to the Geno God fight. Pretty much every deified in the universe received the same starlight. 2839 Xenogeneics without Spirai. Hansen's finger touched the starlight. The starlight turned into a dot of starlight on his fingertip. Following Hansen's wish, the starlight formed two words, human dollar. In the next moment, starlight flew back into the skies and returned to the Geno God list. The Geno God list now had human dollar on it. Almost at the exact same time, Hansen saw many names appear on the Geno God list. Hansen looked at them. He saw many familiar names. Empty Mountain, Golden Growler. Is that Golden Growler? When Hans saw the name, he was taken aback. Although Hansen was excited to see his little gold, he was worried little gold had forgotten about him. Why disguise as a human? You are xenogeneic. God looked at Hansen with interest. I like doing that. Hansen did not explain any further, but he felt surprised and thought, after I became xenogeneic, not even God can see that my true body is human. That is surprising. It is good that God thinks I am just disguising myself. Otherwise, with God's suspicions of humans, something might have happened. In the palace situated inside a red dwarf, a few blue-blooded men bowed before a king. Legion leader, the Geno God list has suddenly appeared. This is a great opportunity for our legion. If we can achieve first place and claim the God Spirit seat, it will be great for our legion. Then, we will let Lulai join the Geno God fight, the man coldly said. On Empty Mountain's peak, the green-haired growler screamed excitedly. God helped out Empty Mountain. Little Mountain Leader has only just become true God. Now this chance has arisen. This time, Little Mountain Leader must achieve first place to become a God Spirit and earn glory for all of Empty Mountain. All across the universe, many scary elites were aiming for first place on the God list. Only the old fortune teller lowered his head and frowned, thinking of something. He didn't speak. In the Extreme King, many deified elites signed up. Even if they didn't achieve first place, getting into the top 100 enabled them to receive many benefits. The three high races were not interested in the Geno being scroll. They would not join those. This time, the Geno God list was something many deified elites of the three high races would participate in. Hansen thought the Geno universe only had a few thousand deified elites at the most. In the Geno God list, there were at least 10,000 names. Plus, some deified elites had selected not to join. There were many more deified elites in the Geno universe than Han Sun had believed there to be. Han Sun did not expect to achieve first place. After all, his power was not enough to battle a true god elite yet. If he could get into the top 100, he would not be disappointed. Let me see what the rewards are for reaching the top 100. It is pretty generous. The first 100 can receive a true god item. Han Sun felt as if he must work hard. A true god treasure was always good for him to have. The most important thing Han Sun needed now was for him to become butterfly class. Being larva class did not allow him to remain as an adult for long. When he had the body of a child, he could not activate the powers inside him. He could not fight strong elites. I need 20 more deified genes to reach a maximum of 100. It looks like I will be too late to join the first god fight. I hope the first fight is not against some scary elite. Just give me a primitive or something. Just let me go through the first fight with ease. Han Sun planned on going to Nine Defense Palace to kill deified xenogeneics and absorb their genes. Nine Defense Palace could only be entered alone. So Han Sun asked God to wait in the garden and await his return. Just as Han Sun had entered Nine Defense Palace, he discovered that God had been following. Han Sun did not say anything. The restrictions of Nine Defense Palace were powerful, but to stop a being that called itself God, maybe it was not that great. After Han Sun opened the palace, he walked to room 0038. He saw a xenogeneic locked inside. It was a big black bird with ink feathers. Its eyes were like the sun and moon. One was yellow, and one was red. It looked at Han Sun, which gave him a chill. God looked at the big black bird and said, this xenogeneic is weird. What is weird? Han Sun shrugged. If God said the xenogeneic was weird, there had to be a problem somewhere. Han Sun always wondered why Bai King granted Han Sun access to Nine Defense Palace. He wondered if it was all part of some grand conspiracy. If there was, he could not identify it. If God really did find out something about all these things, it would be a great help. This xenogeneic does not have a spirit. God looked at the xenogeneic while speaking. Spirit. Han Sun looked at God with confusion. He did not know what that meant. What was a spirit? Everything has a spirit, God said. A spirit is not a soul, but it is similar. All creatures without a spirit can live, but they cannot evolve. I thought evolution depended on a person's genes. Han Sun did not understand. That is correct. The genes are one of the changes that occur within a spirit. With a spirit, genes can mutate. Otherwise, pure generic gene messages cannot make things mutate. God looked at the black bird and said, that is a larva-class xenogeneic. If it can become this level, it should have a spirit. But this bird does not have a spirit. That is weird. God was silent for a moment before looking at Han Sun and saying, this place must have another xenogeneic, right? Take me to have a look. Han Sun wanted to know what happened there as well. He took God to look at the other xenogeneics before he killed them. Because the power of those xenogeneics was stronger than his, he had previously skipped them and did not kill the xenogeneics. There were 3 xenogeneics like that. Han Sun brought God to open one of the palaces. God saw them and immediately said, a butterfly-class xenogeneic that does not possess a spirit as well. This is so weird. He inspected the other 2 xenogeneics too. That just made God's face inflected with more curiosity. Interesting. I did not know the Extreme King had such a very interesting place. The xenogeneics here do not have spirits, especially the xenogeneic in Palace 0002. That is a true God-class time ghost. It is a very famous, scary xenogeneic. Rarely can a creature of the universe fight it. It does not have a spirit now either. That is interesting. God looked at Time Ghost with interest like a kid looking at toys. Is there a problem with the xenogeneic that does not possess a spirit? Han Sun had eaten many of the xenogeneics from that place. Although he did not feel anything negative with them, he was worried that it was bad for his body. Aside from the fact they cannot evolve, there is nothing bad about them. God replied, and then muttered to itself. Were their spirits taken out by force? If so, how was it achieved? What does it mean? Chapter 28 41st Phi Han Sun killed the ink feather god bird. He did not receive a beast soul. God looked at the xenogeneic that had no spirit. After that, God said nothing more. Han's son took the ink feather god bird's flesh with him to leave the Nine Defense Palace. He kept refining the flesh while waiting for the god fights to begin. Because there were deified beings that did not accept their invitation to the god fights. It would be another 3 days before the god fights began. For the next 3 days, the deifieds had some time to reconsider their invitation. Han's son wanted to know if Bai King was going to join the god fights, but he still had not had the chance to meet up with him since his return. Han's son was looking at the Geno god list for a while, but he did not find Bai King's name there. When Bowing came to teach Han's son more manners, she carefully asked, "Mr. Holy Baby, are you joining the Geno god list fights?" Ever since what had happened, Bowing was far more polite to Han Sr. Who knows? Maybe. Han's son answered like it worked both ways. He joined as an adult, and he had used the name Dollar. He did not want the Extreme King to know that. If you do not join, it will be a grand shame. With your power, perhaps you would get into the top 100. Bowing spoke it, as if it was a big shame. Clearly, she had seen the Geno god list, and not found Holy Baby's name there. After Bowing left, Han's son did not see God. Ever since they had returned from Nine Defense Palace, God always took off alone. Han's son did not know where God went. 3 days later, Han's son was finally able to start fighting. He first took a look at who he was going to go up against. He saw his name and Bar's name matched with it. Is this guy Bar? Han's son was shocked. He was the one who had pushed Bar to deified, and he knew the might Bar possessed. Although Bar's level was not high, and he was only primitive or transmutation at best, his almost immortal power frequently gave Han's son a headache. I guess I was lucky to not encounter a true god-class enemy. At least Han's son felt safer. Meanwhile, over in the destroyed realm, Bar saw he was being pitted against Dollar. His eyes looked slightly excited as he said, "I can't believe the first fight puts me against Dollar. With the destroyed skills I created, he will be given quite the shock." Dia Robber frowned and said, "Although the skills you created combine your god body elements, it is very powerful. Against Dollar, you should always be careful. That guy is not normal." "I know. But this time, it will not be so easy for him to defeat me. With my destroyed skills, there is no way I can lose." Bar was feeling confident. The Geno god list appeared. It made all the creatures in the universe want to watch. It was so rare to see deified elites, and it was even rarer to see them do battle. I thought Geno god list was the same as the Geno being scroll. I thought many tiers would conduct fights at the same time, but it isn't like that. It's a mishmash, and each fight occurs consecutively. That is very good. We won't miss any of the fights. Yeah, deified level fights are so exciting to watch. If a Geno god list had not suddenly appeared, we would never have had the chance to see them fight. It will be great if I get to watch every fight. Deified class Geno god list is the first place on the god list. That should be the strongest person in the universe. Yes, the strongest person in the universe without a doubt. The two deifieds in the first fight are Bar from the Destroyed, and the Human Dollar. Human Dollar. Why does that name sound so familiar? Ah, that Dollar must have been the one who achieved first place in the Marquise bracket for the Geno being scroll. Yes, it is him. I remember. He defeated Lone Bamboo from Sky Palace, and achieved first place in the Marquise bracket. How many years has it been? Yet he has already achieved deified class. Isn't that a bit too fast? Human. What kind of race is that? Because there had never been a god fight before. In the first round of the god fights, every creature in the universe gave it all their focus. Han's son had to transform into adult mode to enter the Geno god list. He entered space and saw Bar far away. He was coming at him. In the Red Dwarf Palace, the man who looked like a king was watching Han's son in the Geno god list. It looked as if he was in deep thought. This Dollar is so weird. He uses the name human to travel around the universe, and hasn't been killed by God. That is special. In a dark world with a broken palace, a weird big bird sighed. Human? That is a familiar and yet strange name. A woman who was quite pretty looked at Nine Life Cat and asked, "Old Cat, is this Dollar really human?" In the sanctuaries, there was a person called Dollar. Old Cat said after thinking for a moment. But how could an ordinary human level up so fast? That just doesn't make sense. I don't care if he is. Besides, aside from Little Master, no one can really kill God. It is a shame Little Master is not deified yet. Otherwise, if he was to join this God fight, he would certainly earn first place. Then Sacred would become feared once again. What a shame. Who knew there would suddenly be a Geno God list showing up? If we had known about this beforehand, we would have made Little Master become deified before it began. It is too late now. Dollar, I finally have a chance to fight you. Bar Flew excitedly shouted as he flew toward Han's Senator. His entire body was surging with the eagerness to do battle. His eyes looked as if they were on fire. Hansen thought, how could this guy still be the same? He still behaves like this as a deified. The guy hasn't changed a bit. Hansen was going to finish this fight quickly, but he then heard Bar say, Dollar, I created a skill called Destroyed Skill. I can kill another of the same level as easy as I can kill a dog. Do not disappoint me, okay? Oh, I would love to see it. Hansen knew that Bar's destroyed body was strong. It was almost indestructible. But Bar's fighting ability was average at best. He was a bit arrogant by saying killing him was as easy as killing a dog. Still, Hansen was curious. He gave up on killing Bar right away. He wanted to see this destroyed skill. Upon hearing Bar say that, Diarober was speechless. He held his head down and felt a headache come on. That guy was the poster child of brainless people. His words offended many deified elites. The people of the destroyed are so powerful. Killing another as easily as killing a dog. I hope the next time we meet we can see who will end up killing who. Maybe he can't go past the first round. He will get killed like a dog by the human. Many deified elites were angry. While they were all mocking him, Bar moved. He was madly running at Han's Senator as Bar began to sprint. His whole body was on fire. He looked like a black sun. Chapter 2841 Suicidal. Although it was separated through the Geno God list, one could still feel Bar's scary presence. Normal creatures only sensed that Bar was powerful. It was hard to tell exactly how strong he was. The faces of the deified elites participating in the Geno God list all exhibited different amounts of change. The presence Bar released was very strong for someone at the primitive level. That power is not bad, but if he said he was invincible against others in the same tier as him, that is a bit over the top. An extreme king primitive deified said while grunting. If I was his opponent, I could easily suppress him. Other primitive deifieds thought the same way too. In the next second, the faces of the primitive deified people who had these thoughts changed. Pang! Bar rushed before Han's Senator the moment their fists collided. His whole body exploded like a nuke. Every inch of his flesh erupted with power. He unleashed all of the power inside his body. A big black sun arose. It was like a demonic mouth that could swallow everything. The meteors and small planets in space were destroyed by that scary power. It was like everything within that explosion was destroyed. Power like that was already better than anything else a primitive deified could achieve. There were no deified primitives out there who could explode their god bodies completely, and there were no primitive deifieds who could use their own god bodies as Bar could. This self-exploding power had the same magnitude of a powerful attack dealt by a transmutation class deified. Killing another of the same level as easily as killing a dog was indeed an exaggeration, but the power of that attack could effectively deal with most primitives deifieds. It was nothing to sneer at. Fuck. This guy is too crazy, a primitive deified angrily said. Is this how he plays? He is making himself a bomb. The black sun was like a demon that could control everything. It flickered in space for 5 seconds, and then started to go dim. The shockwave made people's hearts jump. It made the normal creatures that watched the fight become very scared. Even if they were only just watching this scene, it still terrified the people. It is no wonder a deified elite of the destroyed is so scary. Of course, that is why Bar was called a genius. Although he used Hansen's blessing to become deified, what he achieved was nothing weaker than a deified who had managed to level up. He is perhaps even stronger. Aren't you guys just talking trash? If people did not have Bar's destroyed body, who would play like this? Dollar is so unlucky. He encountered Bar in his first fight. a man who will recklessly play with his life. Even if he doesn't die, he will end up wretchedly disabled. I don't think there is much of a chance of him being rendered disabled. Although what Bar said was a bit crazy, he does have what it takes to be crazy. His self-exploding power can really kill most that are of the same level. Perhaps Dollar's level is higher than him. Impossible. In the Geno being scroll fight, Dollar was only Marquise. How many years has it been? Leveling up to primitive so soon is already a scary prospect. If he was larva class, that would be ridiculous to suggest. While everyone was discussing the situation, the black sun had started to dim. The sky full of ash started to come together. It had become Bar's body. This power is like a bug. He will explode himself to die with his enemy, and then come back to life. It really is something invincible against another of the same level. A high-level extreme king deified commented. Just as he finished speaking, the creatures in the universe were shocked. Within the space that exploded, that saw that everything had been turned into dust. Right at the epicenter of the explosion, Dollar was still hovering. It looked as if he had not been injured at all. Even the armor he wore had not been dealt a scratch. How is that possible? He is not injured. How did he do this? Everyone was shocked. He resisted such a scary attack, and did not get hurt. Did he become a transmutation class? I don't think so. I have never heard of this race called humans before. Not even the 3 higher races can level up so quickly, and he is just from one of the smaller races. How could he level up so fast? If it is not his level, do you think he has some special sort of Geno art or treasure? While everyone was trying to guess, they heard Bar laughing like a madman. It is no wonder you are Dollar. I knew it would not be so easy to defeat you. Now let us begin. What I am going to do next will require all my true power. After that, Bar's body was burning with a light flame that was like a demon flame. His whole body turned into a black flame that was headed for Han Senator Pang. 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 Bar's entire body had become a scary explosion that had a humanoid shape. It kept coming for Han Senator. The self-explosion power was now stronger and scarier than before. After he self-exploded, Bar immediately regenerated the shape of his body. Then he committed to another suicidal attack on Han Senator. Every attack was self-exploding. Bar was like an undying demon. The scary, suicidal attacks made the scalps of many deified elites itch. What really shocked them was Dollar's performance. They saw Dollar just standing there in space. He was like a god. He was just hovering there and not moving. He randomly waved a punch and blocked all of Bar's scary and suicidal attacks. It did not matter how Bar self-exploded. He was unable to hurt him. The scariest self-explosion was like a beautiful, albeit useless firework. Against Han Senator, it did not even make him stumble an inch. Too strong. Dollar is too strong. Many spirits were so excited while watching all of this, but most of the creatures could only tell that Dollar was strong. They did not know how strong he was. Weird. How can Dollar level up so quickly? It looks like he is at least transmutation class, but he could be even higher. The elites who were able to understand the scene knew that there was a level gap between Bar and Dollar. If Dollar wanted to beat Bar, it would be easy. Dollar, let's finish this while we compete in the Geno godless fight. On a planet in Narrow Moon, Isha was staring at Han's son and Bar fighting. Her eyes were burning with the desire for combat, and her face was as cold as ice. Isha joined the Geno godless fight too. She had studied the combatant list. She only had to win twice. In the third match, she would square off against Dollar. God was in the garden watching the events unfold with interest. God seemed to be happy watching this performance. It is a shame. I should have given him a stronger opponent. But don't worry. Things will get more interesting later. God took out a notebook and looked at it. It seemed as if it was a list of fighters. Let's end this. Han's son had now seen Bar's destroyed skill. It was strong, but it was still comparable to something like Break Six Skies. It was nothing unstoppable. The only thing Bar was strong with was his indestructible god body. Han's son had no mood to keep going. He punched toward Bar. Good timing. Bar roared. He did not fall back. He ran toward Han's Senator. No matter how powerful the enemy was, he was not afraid. Of course, that was because having a god body meant not needing to fear death. 2842 Queen in Space Garden. When Bar touched Han Sen's hand, his body exploded again. He became a black sun. After the explosion, Bar was supposed to regenerate his power. Instead, the onlookers saw something weird. The black sun that had exploded was grabbed and lifted by Han Senator. It was unlike energy generated by an explosion. It was like a big black ball. Han Sen used one hand to grab the big black ball. He lifted it twice. The people were frozen as they watched Han Sen play ball. The audience did not know what was going on. The energy of the explosion has frozen. Is that a nice Geno art? I don't think so. There is no freezing effect. Holy shit. Is this the legendary time freeze? You don't know shit. Time freeze stops things from moving. How could he just play with it like that? Is it time freeze? Is Dollar's talent associated with time and space? Impossible. The two talents of time and space are very rare. What are the odds of a guy from a small race having the two talents of time and space? If it is not time and space, how can he play with it like that? Suddenly, many deified elites were in shock. Extreme King's second uncle Bai was stunned. Are they really time and space talents? I thought time and space talents were hard to appear on the same creature. I thought only Sacred Leader had the two talents of time and space. This Dollar has the two talents of time and space too. It is hard to tell, but it does look like the two talents of time and space, an Extreme King Elder said with a frown. In a dark corner of the palace, Old Vulture asked with shock. Old Cat, does this guy really have the two talents of time and space? Impossible. The two talents of time and space are not that easy to find, Old Cat said. His face was riddled with confusion. He was also suspicious. No matter which way you look at it, that power looks like the two talents of time and space. Old Vulture looked at Han Sen, who was holding the black ball. It is hard to say, but it shouldn't be, Old Cat insisted. It was unknown how many scary beings were confused by what Han Sen was doing with his hands. They were not saying Han Sen's power was scary. They were saying that the two talents of time and space were very rare. If a pig had that talent, it would be a god pig. In the garden, God's eyes narrowed into a squint. A very interesting facial expression appeared as God said, he can control the universal cogwheels. That is an interesting power. Even the very high sense cannot achieve that. That is an interesting xenogenic. Han Sen lifted the black ball twice before throwing it. The black ball was thrown away like a ball into a planet. It blew the planet into nothing. Bar showed up again. He was furious and wanted to charge Han Sen, but Han Sen coldly said, if you come at me again, I will turn you into a ball forever. Bar felt a chill. Although he had an undying body, being turned into a ball forever sounded like a fate that was worse than death. Right now, I am just primitive class. Let me become transmutation before fighting you again. Bar gnashed his teeth. He knew there was no point in fighting him. Therefore, he decided to concede and exit the Geno God list. Dollar's victory left many questions unanswered. It puzzled the elites throughout the universe. Even the hidden old antiques wanted to know who that Dollar was. The only answer they were going to get for now was human. Han Sen left the Geno God list as a victor. He returned to the garden and looked like a child again. He did not want to use too much of his power. What was that Geno art called? God asked with a smile. Why would I tell you? Han Sen knew what God's temper was like. It was a being that did not seem to get mad. If people did not know the truth, it was almost as if God could simply be bullied. Han Sen went to pour some tea. God laughed because Han Sen did not answer, but did not ask the question again. God just carried on watching the God fights that came next. Han Sen was lying on a chair. He wanted to watch the next fight too, because he wanted to watch Golden Growler. It was the fourth match, and Han Sen wanted to know if it was his Golden Growler. Han Sen did not notice who the second bout was against. When he took a look, he was shocked. The two deified creatures in the second round were ones Han Sen had never heard of. One was called a Dolek and named Dolek. He did not know what that was. The other deified creature was called Space Garden's Queen. Space Garden. How many space gardens are there in the universe? My space garden does not have a queen. Han Sen felt weird. He was looking at the space battleground on the Geno God list. A shadow entered the space battleground. Its body was weird. It was a blue transparent light. Its texture was like jelly that had been shined on. The body shape was like that of a giant. When the other body showed up on the battleground, Han Sun screamed and lost his voice. It was Huang Fujing. Huang Fujing has become a primitive deified that fast. Han Sun was shocked. It was no wonder she was willing to call herself Space Garden's queen. Han Sun had warned all the humans there not to call themselves human. He guessed Huang Fujing was already in Space Garden, which was why she used that name to participate in the god fights. The Space Garden itself did not draw much attention, because the flower gods of Space Garden were not well known for their fighting. It was not even known if they had deified elites. Even if they did have one, it would not be anything spectacular. On the other hand, the Dolek had drawn much attention. The Doleks. I cannot believe that race still exists. I thought Sky Palace had destroyed it. Since when were the Doleks that easy to destroy? They are considered one race and one body. As soon as one is alive, they can multiply and build their race. It looks like this Dolek just grew up not too long ago. He seems to have only just become primitive. A Dolek is good at splitting energy. Although it is not like Bar with his destroyed god body, it is scary all the same. I bet that Space Garden Queen cannot beat it. Can the word queen be used so randomly? That guy is too cocky. While everyone was talking about the upcoming battle, they saw Dolek had a scary blue substance chain. It punched toward Queen, covering the sky and ground in blue light. Huang Fujing was in front of the giant Dolek. She looked small. In the next second, Huang Fujing's beautiful, long legs were raised. It was like a bat leak striking Dolek. Pang! The substance chains, which were like blades, cut Dolek's blue light. It also cut his giant jelly body in half. 2843 Infinite Killer. The Dolek was cut in half, but did not fall. Both sides of its body started to writhe until they were two smaller-sized Doleks. Ha! Ha! A Dolek cannot be killed so easily. Cutting their body means duplicating their numbers. Space Garden has never had a deified. It is normal to expect people that come out to have no experience with such things. I bet she has never even heard of a Dolek before. Otherwise, why would she cut open the Dolek's body like that? She did not know that a Dolek's body, when cut open, will split into two. Now, she will be forced to fight two Doleks, and its power won't have been split in half. The two Doleks will have the same power as one fully composed Dolek. That means she has one more opponent to deal with. Yeah, Doleks had the scariest splitting power back in the day. They developed like crazy in the universe. They created many big disasters, and Sky Palace was forced to wipe them out. I cannot believe some have remained, and they have become deified. Encountering an opponent like this is bad luck for Queen. Huang Fujing did not move. She saw the Dolek get split in two. She again lifted her long legs and swept them across the Doleks to cut them in half through the waist. The Doleks that had been split into four from two were smaller again. There were now four Doleks, and they were roaring as they went for Huang Fujing. Huang Fujing was quiet. Her legs were like a blade that kept lashing out. She cut open all of the Doleks before her, and the number of Doleks kept increasing. This queen cannot be saved. Can she not tell that the more Doleks she breaks open, the more Doleks there will be, and the more danger she will be in? What can she do? Back then, Sky Palace sent out butterfly-class fire element elites to incinerate the Doleks completely. Obviously, Queen is not fire element. She cannot deal with that many Doleks. You are right. Unless there is an elemental weakness to exploit or absolute power to suppress, a deified elite cannot do anything to defeat a Dolek. Huang Fujing's legs were like blades. She repeatedly kept slicing the Doleks, and the Doleks continued to grow in number. Their power did not decrease. Her situation was becoming more difficult. When everyone thought Huang Fujing was surrounded, and the only path forward was one of loss, people saw her suddenly vanish from her position. In the next moment, all of the creatures in the world saw a fabulous killing show. Huang Fujing's body kept flashing through the space battleground. She looked like a killing machine that could teleport. Wherever she went, Dolek bodies kept getting cut open. The number of Doleks kept increasing. No matter how many Doleks appeared, to Huang Fujing, it was futile. She kept appearing wherever she wanted. She was able to kill every single Dolek around her. It was like being in front of a tiger. No matter how big the sheep flock was, it could not harm a tiger. They would all be killed. Infinite teleport. There is no time pausing. Even a true god cannot have this power, right? Dragon 8 was shocked. If she does not have that talent, not even a true god can accomplish what she is doing. Dragon 1 confidently said. This queen, where does she come from? She has a scary and infinite teleportation power, and the perfect killing skills of a machine. She is a killing queen born to fight. On the battleground, even if there were millions of armies, they would die if she wanted them to. Ordinary creatures were even more shocked by what they were seeing. With the thrilling performance and stunning appearance of Huang Fujing, they were blown away. What a shame. If she had not encountered a Dolek, with her infinite teleportation skill and perfect killing skills, even if she had met a transmutation deified creature, there would be no chance of her losing. Bar's eyes turned bright. He was thinking about the possibility of himself earning a teleportation power like that. He wondered about using his destroyed skill with it. He could be a moving nuke. He could blow himself up wherever he wanted to. That is a shame. But I do not think she is one of the flower gods, Diarabber said. He looked at her with confusion. After thinking a moment, Bar said, I have heard the space garden was taken over by Han Senator. She must be a crystallizer like Han Sr. I did not expect there were other geniuses among the crystallizers aside from just Han's son, Diarabber replied. How could you forget so easily? Bar asked. Han's son has that blessing power. It does not matter how weak the genes of a crystallizer are. After being blessed by him, it is easy for them to become deified. He was one of the people who had been benefited by Han Sen's blessings. He knew how amazing that skill truly was. You are right, Diarabber said with a nod. Many people were thinking the same thing as Bar and Diarabber. They were all thinking about how they might get Han's son to start blessing their people. If they could, they wanted Han's son to bless every single one of their people. It was a shame Han's son was said to be hiding in Space Garden. Entering Space Garden was nearly impossible. The 3 high races could not enter there. It was even harder for one of the other races. Many people wanted to go for Holy Pirate, since only he could travel through the universe freely. But Holy Pirate seemed to have disappeared. No one was able to find him. Huang Fujing's teleportation killing was beautiful. To the Dolek that could split infinitely, it was not useful. No matter how many times she killed them, there would only be more Doleks created. Seeing a space full of Doleks everywhere, everyone thought Queen was going to end up losing. It did not matter how many times she used her infinite teleportation technique. She could not win. Huang Fujing's body suddenly appeared in the sky. She did not attack the Doleks, which were now like a sea. When everyone thought Queen was going to give up, they saw her body move. Instantly, many queen shadows appeared in the sky. It was now like an endless amount of queens moving forward to attack together. It was like many scary powers working together. It was like a killing machine. It suddenly killed all of the Doleks again and again, from pieces to slices, slices to sticks, sticks to dots, and dots to smaller dots. In the end, they just became molecules. The Doleks had been cut into nothing because of the countless queens. Everyone was frozen while watching this happen. The Doleks did not resurrect. Oh my God, what did I just see? Someone finally screamed. They should not have just been shadow doppelgangers, so why do they have a battle power in the same body? What the hell was that? Second Uncle Bye-Bye could not help but open his eyes wide and scream. Time and space power. Another time and space power. 2844 Scapegoa. A time and space real super god body, with Huang Fujing's personal super strong attack powers, makes her a killing queen kind of existence. Han Sun could not help but compliment her. Interesting time and space movement talents. Since when have crystallizers been so talented? God squinted and looked at Huang Fujing exiting the stage with elegance. Han Sun's heart jumped. He did not say anything. He knew the more he said, the more he would expose. It was unknown, it was deliberate, but God asked Han Sun, "What do you think?" "That is an interesting talent, but primitive deified level is too low," Han Sun coldly said. It does not matter the level of an interesting creature, God harshly replied. Even if someone becomes true God, boring people are still boring. Perhaps, but I am not interested in any other creature, Hansen said. I just want to know if I can get into the top 100 to claim the rewards on offer. You must work harder, God said with a laugh. Do you not see me working hard? Hansen picked up a hunk of flesh from the ink feather god bird. It was freshly cooked. He inserted it into his mouth. He used consume to refine it. He was also waiting for the third match of the Geno god list to start. Consume is the Geno art of the consume ants. It is weird that you can make use of consume and eat xenogenic genes to evolve. That evolution power is very rare in the universe. God looked at Hansen with interest. You can have a slice if you want, Hansen said with a smile. In that case, I will not deny the offer. Hansen had only said it for fun, but God really wanted to try some out. God picked up some ink feather god bird meat and started to chew it. Its mouth and hands were full of grease. It tastes so good. Hansen could not be bothered talking to God. When he saw the people in the third match, he felt compelled to throw up the ink feather bird god meat he had just eaten. Space Garden, Sword Fairy. Hansen was thinking about who might use that name. Aside from Gu Qingcheng, there was no other. Of course, not long later, Gu Qingcheng, who was wearing green clothes, appeared on the space battleground. She floated in like a fairy. Her opponent was a deified of the Extreme King. The great coincidence here was that the Extreme King deified was also using a sword, but it was a great sword. Ha, it is her. Upon seeing Gu Qingcheng, God was shocked. Hansen knew God knew Gu Qingcheng, but he still asked, What? Do you know her? Is she famous? She is a very interesting spirit, God said with a smile. She is one of the very few that did not make a wish before me. I did not expect she would show up here. This will be interesting to say the least. Hansen thought, it must not be incorrect. This god is the god the seventh team encountered. When many spirits in the universe heard the words Space Garden, they became excited. More deified creatures are joining from Space Garden. In the past, the flower gods did not have deifieds. Why are there two deified showing up now? Creatures that did not know what happened started asking around. It was not long before they learned that Hansen had taken over Space Garden. It is no wonder Space Garden suddenly has so many deified creatures. It is God's daddy who is there. Godfather Hansen is so strong. The power to make deified creatures is invincible. Bar and Queen are so strong. It looks like deified creatures that are blessed by Hansen are stronger than ordinary deified creatures. Perhaps it is just a coincidence. Let's see how this sword fairy performs first. There is no way that all the creatures Hansen blessed to become deified are stronger than usual. Who knows? But I think Godfather Han is very powerful. He can randomly create so many deified creatures. I am afraid this match will not be an easy one to win. After all, the opponent is an Extreme King deified. People had just finished talking when Gu Qingcheng revealed the sword in her hands. She swung it and slashed toward the Extreme King deified elite. Good timing! The Extreme King deified coldly shouted. He raised the great sword as substance chains arose like the tide. They were coming straight for Gu Qingcheng. Gu Qingcheng's swordlight strangely flashed through space. Ordinary creatures were unable to see what happened. That Extreme King deified's chest was delivered a massive wound that exposed his ribs. One saw a large lesion on his organs. God blood spilled like rain. Suddenly, the face of the Extreme King deified looked shocked. He did not let Gu Qingcheng slash again. He was quick to concede and escape the space battleground. You took my hit and did not die. You are not bad, Gu Qingcheng coldly said. She put her sword away and flew out of the space battleground. Holy shit! One slash to defeat an Extreme King deified. That is too powerful. This sword fairy is too cool. Her sword skills are so overbearing. Godfather Han is so strong. The deified creatures he blessed are better and better. I do not know how many deified creatures Godfather Han has created, but if this keeps going, the universe is going to be conquered by him. Hansen, that asshole. What kind of power does he possess? How can he make so many deified creatures that easily? How can they all be so brutal? You will all find a way to enter Space Garden. Capture Han Sun no matter the cost. Not just ordinary creatures were like this. Even the leaders of high races had red eyes. They wanted to go to Space Garden, capture Han Sun, and force him to make their people deified. In Space Garden, Qin Xian was worried. She said, Han Sun always wants us to keep a low profile. With you guys joining like that, won't it cause trouble? Little Uncle Wang Yuhang laughed and said, Don't worry. Brother King told people Han Sun was in Space Garden. Little Sun will be the scapegoat. It will be fine. Ha! Gu Qingqing had only just returned when she heard Wang Yuhang speak. She could not help herself from laughing. Xie Qingqing laughed and said, In the future, Space Garden is going to become so famous. Of course, we are going to use this opportunity to improve the reputation of Space Garden and get a reputation for Sanmu too. He will be happy. I know, right? Bao was holding a big piece of fruit. She was eating. She totally agreed and kept nodding. She clearly just wanted to see chaos more than anything. She did not want to be bored. Now Han Sun could not be happy. The first 3 rounds had 3 humans, including himself. That was a bit over the top. Did God notice something and deliberately set up these matches? Han Sun looked at God, who was eating meat. There was nothing really suspicious about God's behavior, so he denied the thought. I do not think so. Otherwise, God would not have been so surprised when he saw Gu Qingqing. Perhaps it really was just a coincidence. Maybe there are only those 2 from Space Garden joining. Thinking about this possibility, Han Sun felt worse. He knew he had reminded them many times to maintain an extremely low profile. Thinking about the personalities of those people, none of them knew what it meant to keep a low profile. Also, Space Garden had many resources for them. They were leveling up much faster now, so there was no way Han Sun could keep them quiet. God bless me. Please do not let these monsters find out they are human. Han Sun still did not know he had become the scapegoat of Space Garden, which was now overwhelmed with deifieds. 2845 Golden Growler. Finally, it is the 4th round. I wonder if Golden Growler is little gold. Han Sun stared at the space battleground in contemplation, waiting for Golden Growler to be revealed. If Golden Growler was really little gold, Han Sun was worried about who its opponent might have been. Although it was composed of only 3 words, one would know what kind of race Ancient Thunder God was. It was a very scary being composed of only 3 words. Ancient God was the race with the least amount of beings out of the 3 high races. There didn't have very high numbers, and it was almost impossible for them to obtain more. Every generation of the Ancient God was the result of one dying. It was a case of death and being reborn. Han Sun's body had Ancient Water God's Ancient God origin. In the future, it might become the new Ancient Water God. In the past, Han Sun saw Ancient Water God assault the Geno Hall. He thought Ancient Water God was an almighty being, but he did not know how powerful it was. Now that he thought about it, it was likely a scary being that was true God class. Ancient gods were born deified. It was not rare for the beings of that race to become true God. If Golden Growler was little gold, going up against Ancient Thunder God would make it a bad fight for him. The sky shimmered with streaks of lightning, as an ancient god giant formed of electricity appeared in the space battleground. It was the same as Ancient Water God. Ancient gods were creatures that were formed of pure energy. Ancient Thunder God's whole body was composed completely of thunder. Every movement it made was carried with the strength of thunder. The whole of space flickered with lightning like it was there but not there. It was like it was connected to the Ancient Thunder God. To be honest, if it was all based on one's appearance, Ancient Thunder God looked more like a god spirit than King Jun and the others. Seeing Ancient Thunder God's substance chains move, Han Sun's heart felt as if it was sinking. He started to hope Golden Growler was not little gold. No matter which way he viewed it, Ancient Thunder God was a true god elite that was at the top of the pyramid. A shadow quickly appeared in the space battleground near Ancient Thunder God. The body was not that big. It was only around 3 feet tall. The body looked as if it had been made of gold. It kind of looked like a lion or a kirin. Its head had a gold horn, and its hair looked as if it had been made of gold. It really is little gold. Han Sun was excited and happy about that. He was exuberant to see Little Gold again. He was also surprised to see Little Gold's first fight was against Ancient Thunder God. This match was likely going to be worse than good. He suspected Little Gold was going to lose. Growler's blood still exists, but its blood does not seem to be pure. God looked at Little Gold with interest. When Little Gold was kidnapped by the green-haired beast, Hansen knew what Growler bloodline Little Gold had. But that was not what he was concerned about. He just hoped Little Gold would turn out okay and safe. After all, his opponent was Ancient Thunder God. In this universe, not many creatures were able to recognize the blood of Little Gold. Not everyone was as smart as God. After all, Little Gold did not have pure blood. He looked a bit different from the old Growler too. The only ones that could recognize Golden Growler were the oldest people in the universe. Not many people knew what the Growlers looked like in this day and age. Ancient Thunder God was not in the mood to figure out where Little Gold came from. His voice was like a thunderstorm that rolled through space. He said, "If you leave now, you may continue with your petty existence." Little Gold looked at Ancient Thunder God with eyes that appeared like gold glass. He did not speak or concede, and exist the space battleground. Ancient Thunder God stopped talking. His eyes were brewing with the power of thunder. They suddenly became two electric laser beams that came straight for Little Gold. There was enough power in that attack to blow up a giant planet. It really is a true god being. When Hansen saw the scary Thunder God light, he was worried. Ancient gods really are the loved ones of the universe. They are born deified. The chance to become a true god is the highest amongst the three high races. It is a shame they have difficulty breeding. If it was easy for them, the whole universe would undoubtedly be under their control. Robber could not help but be complimentary. Just as he spoke, the thunder power was going to land on Little Gold's face. When it did, Little Gold opened his mouth. Little Gold's body was only 3 feet tall, but his head was big. It was like a male lion's head. Ancient Thunder God was like a thunder giant that was 300 feet tall. They were not even close to being the same scale and size. When Little Gold opened his mouth, it became massive. It was like it could swallow the sky and earth. The scary bolt of electricity shot into his mouth. It did not affect Little Gold. Ancient Thunder God's giant thunder giant body was swallowed by Little Gold. Everyone in the universe was dead silent. Even the scariest deified creatures were suddenly petrified. They all looked upon Little Gold, who looked entirely normal once again. Belch! Little Gold looked full. He opened his mouth and burped. A roll of thunder came with it. Then, it left the space battleground wagging its tail. Is that it? Is it all over? What just happened? Was Ancient Thunder God swallowed by a little gold beast? I think that's what happened, and he burped. No way. That was Ancient Thunder God. The incredibly powerful ancient god. How could it be swallowed? This has to be fake. It has to be fake. Ancient Thunder God will fight his way out of the creature's stomach. Fight your ass. Did you not see the Genogod list? Didn't you see Golden Growler's rank increase? Holy shit. What kind of creature is that? It is so powerful. Everyone in the universe was shocked. No one expected Ancient Thunder God, who was so powerful, would be swallowed by a little gold beast they had never seen before. Ordinary creatures were shocked by how scary Golden Growler was, but many true elites had strange expressions. Eating Dragon Phoenix. Eating Ancient God. The blood of the Growlers continues in this universe. By King's face looked deathly serious. Do the Growlers still have blood in this universe? Old Vulture and a few others were in shock. The Growler bloodline still exists. It looks like the universe is going to go crazy. On the top floor of the Very High's court in outer sky, an old man opened his eyes and looked at the space battleground. His face changed. Ha! Ha! The whole universe should be quivering in their boots after witnessing the power of Little Mountain Leader. The green-haired Growler happily roared. The Growlers are back. Empty Mountain's invincible Beast King is back. He felt as if he was the one who won the match and swallowed Ancient Thunder God. Hansen was shocked, but he did not care if it was Golden Growler or not. Little Gold had become supremely powerful. He was very happy about that. Little Gold has become so powerful in such a short amount of time. I should work harder. Han's son grabbed a chunk of the ink feather god bird's meat and shoved it in his mouth. He increased the speed of its refinery. Deified gene +1. The announcement said in his mind. This golden growler mix is no worse than a pureblood growler. It might seem even better. That is so weird. God looked at little gold with interest. No matter what the case was, that entire fight shocked the whole universe. And it heralded the return of Empty Mountain. The growlers were back. 2846 Father Han, known around the universe Han's son, did not watch the next fight. He had to quickly increase his genes so he could become butterfly class. If he didn't do that, he wouldn't stand a chance when it came to fighting top-class deified creatures. Han's son went straight to the 9 Defense Palace. Before the next fight began, he was hoping to achieve butterfly class. But his gene leveling up progress was not very smooth. That was because he was already larva class. He ate loads of low-class deified xenogeneic genes, but it did not increase his gene tally very much. He needed at least larva-class deified genes if he wanted to soundly earn more. It was the only way to gain the amount of deified genes he needed. Of course, it was great to have butterfly-class deified genes. He would get more genes from them. But the xenogeneics in 9 Defense Palace were mostly primitive classes. Xenogeneics like Time Ghost, even though it was locked up, was not something Han's son had the chops to kill. So his progression was going at a snail's pace for the time being. Luckily, Han's son's next opponent was only going to be a transmutation deified. He had a long time to go before the next fight, and Han's son won the fight smoothly. In his third match, his opponent was similar in larva class. It was a xenogeneic that looked like a giant dragon, but it was not an opponent that truly challenged him. Han's son wanted to kill it, but the giant dragon was evil. The moment it saw things going sour, it threw in the towel and escaped. Han's son won every battle he fought. The name Dollar was something becoming learned across the universe. It was a shame Han's son had to focus all of his time on practicing. He did not have much time to focus on the matches conducted by others. So Han's son had no idea that the most popular name wasn't actually Dollar. It had become Space Garden's Han Senator. Space Garden did not have a deified. Yet 7 from there had joined in the god fights. Although they were all primitive class, their performances had been exceptional. Aside from one of them having bad luck in which the person who encountered a butterfly-class xenogeneic had to get kicked out, the other 6 were able to reach the 3rd round. Of course, luck was involved with them all. After all, they were all primitive classes. They did not meet strong enemies in their first 2 bouts, but their performances and powers displayed were still quite shocking. Pretty much all of them were the best of what a primitive deified could achieve. They all had very good powers. Everyone thought this was because of Han's Senator, thus, Space Garden and Han's son, who did not even use his real name to join the fights, had become the hot topic of the universe. Godfather Han is so awesome. Sword Fairy, Queen, and Dragon Lady Chef are all stronger than the others. I would like to go to Space Garden. I wonder if Godfather would be willing to bless me too. Then, I could come out and play here. I think the little lady from Demon with purple clothing and the little lady from the feather are stronger. I did not expect Teacher Xia to become deified as well. Also, he is a part of Space Garden. That is so rare. But Teacher Xia's luck is so bad. He met a very high true god class, so he had to concede. Space Garden has 7 deifieds. Only Teacher Xia was the one who had the poorest luck. Even that weakest Wang Yuhang had extremely good luck. He encountered 2 primitive deified xenogeneics that were very weak, and it got him into the 3rd round. It is a shame Godfather Han has chosen not to participate in the fights. If he did take part, it would surely be quite interesting. Does Godfather Han need to join the fight? He can just spit out deifieds. Does he need to join the god fights himself? He will earn vast fortunes by just sitting at home. How do we get Godfather Han to start blessing us? If I could ask him, I would be willing to spend everything. Don't you even think about it. Every big race has tried capturing Han's son like crazy. He has created many deifieds. Even the 3 high races are jealous of what he can do. I don't think it will be long before Space Garden becomes the 5th biggest faction in the entire universe. It might even threaten the 4 races ahead of it. I would suggest pledging our allegiance to them quickly. If Space Garden really does become big, we will be the very first few to support it. What you are saying makes sense. If we are lucky and help them out with something, we might be able to get Godfather Han to bless us. If that happens, I can become deified too. Then, I can join the god fights and become very famous. What should I call myself? Space Garden? Cow God? What do you guys think of that name? Many ordinary creatures kept talking about this. Many of them wanted to ally with Space Garden. But Space Garden was completely cut off. No one was able to go in, so no creature was able to join. Upon seeing Han's son bring so many scary deifieds there, the group of flower gods felt very conflicted. Many powerful deified elites were sitting there. They could guarantee the safety of Space Garden, and they could hunt many of the plant xenogeneics to ensure a steady stream of genofluids. Because there were so many deified elites there, it made the flower gods feel a bit worried. They were afraid of their genes being too inferior. They thought it might lead to Han's son and the others abandoning them, because they were not successful in being able to reach deified. They were also hoping that one day, Han's son could give the flower gods some blessings to become deified. The races that had the power to capture Han's son were all trying to find a way to gain access to Space Garden. They were interested in the resources available in Space Garden too. Their main interest was Han's senator. If they were able to choose between Space Garden and Han's son, they would select Han's son without a shadow of a doubt. That was especially true of the Very High. They wanted to get Han's son back. They were afraid of the curse that was believed to plague Han's senator. They did not want to risk it coming true. The Very High were also scared of Space Garden's performance. As Han's son grew stronger, the more upset they felt. Many creatures of the universe were looking for Holy Pirate, since he was the only one who could enter Space Garden without approval. Even the pirates themselves were searching for Holy Pirate. It seemed as if Holy Pirate had truly disappeared. Holy Pirate was feeling very sad. He was being sneaky and feeling scared as he traveled around Extreme King. He had promised Han's son that he would save him from the Extreme King. After a few attempts, there was no chance of him succeeding. Therefore he gave up. As soon as the Geno God list started and Space Garden had stirred up such a big incident, even Holy Pirate himself had become a target of the universe. Fortunately, Holy Pirate was very good at running. If he wasn't, he would have been caught already. Although his name possessed the word holy, there was nothing holy about the man. He was just a runner in the universe. The universe was big, and there was nowhere he couldn't really go. Even the Very High's outer sky was a place he could enter easily. He could steal from the Very High too. That was, after all, how he had become famous in the universe in the first place. Outsiders did not know he stole things. He only played with the things he stole, and quickly returned them to the Very High, just as they were when he took them. If he did not do that, they would not let him get away so easily. In regard to fighting, Holy Pirate did not think he could go up against the best of the Very High or Extreme King. They were all top-class deifieds. Holy Pirate was getting chased by the old antiques, and he had to hide. He went to the Extreme King. He was planning to take Han's son back, so Han's son would take him to Space Garden. With Han's son, he could control Space Garden, which was the perfect place for a den for thieves. It was not too bad being a king. Holy Pirate's power enabled him to ignore many of the security defenses of the Extreme King. He finally reached King's Garden, where Han's son was. Holy Pirate knew there was a guy called Holy Baby there. It was by King's student. When he looked into the garden, there was no sign of Han's senator. He saw a girl. She was sitting in the garden quietly watching the Geno God list fight. (2847) Fighting Isha. He didn't see Han's son, so Holy Pirate was going to leave. Suddenly, the lady looked in his direction, which shocked Holy Pirate. He was very good at hiding his presence. Even true god elites might not find him. So how was that little girl able to? It must be just a coincidence. Holy Pirate looked more closely at her. She was a sky girl who looked fairly weak. She did not seem to be deified, so he felt calm. He knew most elites in Sky Palace, so it was strange that he had no idea who the girl was. Holy Pirate teleported in front of the girl. He drew a knife and placed it against her neck. Do not scream. If you do, I will kill you. If Han's son were there, he would mourn Holy Pirate's mistake for 3 seconds. Unknowingly, he had dared to threaten God. Not many creatures in the universe would dare to do something like that. God gently blinked as it looked at Holy Pirate and asked, "What do you want? You just need to tell me where I can find Holy Baby. Do that, and I will spare your life. Otherwise, ha!" Holy Pirate coldly laughed. The light blade in his hand was close to God's skin. Do you really want to know where he is? God looked at Holy Pirate with shock. You better be honest with me, Holy Pirate coldly said. It will benefit us both. God looked at Holy Pirate and asked, Is that really what you want? What are you talking about? I asked you, so you better respond fast. If you keep talking crap, I will cut off your tongue. Holy Pirate was annoyed. He did not realize that his annoyance was coming from deep within. It was a shame Holy Pirate would have never guessed that God was occupying Han Sen's private garden. So he did not really think about it. The feeling of being a thief made his heart feel really worried and tense. That is why he felt annoyed. God smiled and said, He is in 9 Defense Palace. Holy Pirate thought the little girl was a bit weird. Despite being in a situation like that, she was actually able to smile. Her sense of calmness was not like how other creatures would behave at a time like this. The girl's life was already in his hands, and Holy Pirate's arrogance had consumed his common sense. He asked, What is he doing in 9 Defense Palace? And when will he be back? He went to 9 Defense Palace to hunt Xenogeneics. He has been gone for days. I do not know when he will be back, but I should imagine that it would be rather soon. God answered the man much quicker this time. When Holy Pirate heard the answer, he frowned. He had heard about 9 Defense Palace before. The security of that place was absurdly tight, so it would be more than difficult for him to go there. 9 Defense Palace's restrictions would not stop him. When he looked at the deified elites that guarded 9 Defense Palace, he knew getting past them would not be easy. Holy Pirate looked at God as he asked, Who frequently comes in here? When Holy Baby is here, the maid will come to teach him manners every day, God replied. Ever since he went to 9 Defense Palace, no one else comes. Holy Pirate was happy hearing that. That is great. I will wait for him to come back. I will not be going to 9 Defense Palace. Seeing the girl was cooperating and not screaming her head off, Holy Pirate withdrew his knife. He looked at God, who appeared to be a girl, and said, As long as you listen to what I tell you, I will not hurt you. If you do something bad, do not blame me for being cruel to you. He looked around, but there was nothing particularly special about the garden. The girl was happy to watch the fights taking place on the Geno God list. Holy Pirate was not interested in watching the fights. He took out a box of chess and asked the girl, Do you know how to play chess? I know a little, God said with a smile. Good. Play chess with me. Holy Pirate set up the chessboard while speaking with the girl. Sure. God smiled even more. In 9 Defense Palace, Han's son released a long sigh and thought, My deified genes have finally reached 100, but the 4th round of the God fights is going to start for me soon. I do not have the time to be a butterfly yet. Han's son exited 9 Defense Palace and looked up at the Geno God list in space. He looked at his opponent's name and sighed. I really don't want to go against her. Isha still didn't know that Dollar was Han's senator. She really wanted to beat Dollar and get her scabbard back. Hansen thought Isha might not fight Dollar, but they were being put against each other in the Geno God list. Hansen could not avoid fighting her. I guess it is good. I need to put an end to this once and for all. Hansen was not going to underestimate Isha. Her talents were extremely good. After she joined Sky Palace, she received significant support from Sky Palace leader. Her practice had become exceptional. She even reached the 4th round. One could see how excellent her power was. Hansen looked at the Geno God list. He perused another section of it. He noticed the people from Space Garden all lost their matches in the 3rd round. It was not surprising. After all, they were only primitive deifieds. To be able to win their first 2 rounds was not easy. The enemies they encountered in the 3rd round were at least larva class. For a primitive class, Fighting enemies that were 2 classes ahead, which was the larva class in this case, was too much to ask of them. Golden Growler was still able to prove his strength. In fact, Golden Growler had proven indestructible. He had reached his 4th bout. Aside from Ancient Thunder God, at the beginning of each match, his opponents threw in the towel and gave up. They did not even enter the space battleground to confront him. Aside from Golden Growler, Han Sen saw a few familiar names doing well too. There was Bai Bai from the Extreme King, Dragon 1 from the Dragon, and Zhang Xiandao from Sky Palace. The Extreme King has many of its deifieds participating in the god fights. But why did Bai King not take part? Does he not want the god spirit's seat? Han Sen thought that was strange. Even very high leader had taken part in the fights. Bai King not showing up was quite surprising. The Extreme Kings are one of the 3 higher races. That achievement was not something that boiled down to luck. This Bai King is so mysterious. I wonder what he is planning. Han Sen couldn't find a reason for this. Space flickered with light. It was now his turn to fight Isha. Han Sen did not hesitate. He transformed into an adult, wore his armor, and entered the space battleground. After reaching the space battleground, Han Sen saw Isha was still standing in space. Clearly, she was eager to enter the Geno God List's battleground immediately. We finally meet again. Isha's eyes looked very sharp. She stared at Han Sr., Knife Queen. Why are you still hung up over that small incident? Han Sen harshly asked. I am not going to stop until I die, Isha coldly said. Han Sen reached his hands into the air. A scabbard that looked to have been made of inky stone appeared in his hands. It was the scabbard Han Sen had collected from the demon statue. Isha once said that the scabbard was a relic that belonged to the rebate. From what Han Sen knew, the alpha of the rebate was a woman. The knife mind left behind inside the scabbard belonged to a man. So Han Sen had been suspicious about her claim. Han Sen had already learned about the knife mind inside the scabbard. The scabbard did not mean much to him anymore. How about we make a deal? If you win, I will give this back to you. Han Sen was holding the scabbard like he was holding a knife. "2848 The Broken Scabbard. You being dead, and me being alive is the best gamble to bet on," Isha coldly said. A jade, crystal-looking teeth knife was brewing in her hands. It quickly came flying at Han Senator. The purple knife air became a roaring, swallowing evil ghost. It slashed toward Han Senator. Han Sen smiled. He used the scabbard in his hands like a knife, and thrust it forward. But Han Sen did not use teeth knife power. He only used pure power to slash toward Isha's teeth knife. Pang! The 2 powers collided in space. The purple evil, ghost-looking knife air was being cut open by the scabbard in Han Sen's hand. The purple air was like some dragonfly that vanished in the air. You have really reached larva class, Han Sen said. With that kind of practice, you are better than the old rebate alpha. Isha seemed to know her attack would do nothing against Dollar. She used the teeth knife, which only God knew what kind of beast's teeth it was composed of, and made some weird kind of powerful movement. It wasn't actually the teeth knife moving. It was the space around that was moving. Teeth knife power did not leak out. It had been kept at a very low profile, which made the energy around go toward the teeth knife. The teeth knife, which looked like crystal or jade, was suddenly dyed and turned a deep purple. It was like an evil ghost Fong that had emerged from hell. This kind of power movement is kind of like teeth power, but it is also kind of different. What kind of power is this? Han Sen was shocked, but he quickly realized what sort of power it was. The teeth knife itself has just reached deified class, and Isha is only larva class. The second part must have been a modification of her own. This must be the teeth knife she has modified. I wonder what the difference is between this teeth knife and the teeth knife from the past. Han Sen was not in a rush to strike. He wanted to know what the knife skill was that Isha had modified through teeth knife. He wanted to know the sort of power it possessed. Isha stared at Han Sen with an invasive look. The teeth knife movement in her hand was becoming weaker, but the color was becoming deeper. The purple looked so deep that it almost appeared black. Han Sen's heart felt a little bit scared. It was the reaction one had when sensing one was in danger. It made Han Sen's face more serious looking. I thought you wanted to bet, So let's bet if you are going to live under the strike of my knife, Isha said. The teeth knife in her hand, which looked like an evil ghost fang, was lifted above her head. She immediately slashed toward Han. Senator Han Sun saw a line of knife heirs teleporting in front of him. Their substance chains were thinner than a hair by 100%. Normal people could not see it. One could not see the knife heir. Han Sen's heart was shocked by this. Anywhere a knife heir went, there was space fabric tear. It was scarier than a space element space cutting skill. The knife heir came fast. Han Sun had no time to hesitate. He generated power with the scabbard and struck toward the silk-looking knife heir. It was silent. The scabbard's sturdiness was comparative to a deified treasure, but it was suddenly broken by the thin knife heir. The scary knife heir still kept coming toward Han Sen's body. His body made a quick reaction. He flashed, and the scary knife heir went right past his shoulder. The armor on his shoulder and a piece of his flesh were taken away. The knife heir kept expanding. Wherever the knife heir went, the purple spread. It was like ink in water. It was slowly dyeing everything around. Space was not water. It could not be dyed, but that scary purple ripped through space and kept on tearing it. Since when did teeth power become this scary? It can continuously rip space? Upon seeing space continue to rip, many deifieds were shocked. That is not pure teeth power. It has combined with some kind of cutting element power. Even Dollar was unable to withstand that sharp power. It looks like Knife Queen has practiced teeth power, so much that it has reached a whole new level. The strength of that power is no worse than the most destructive Geno arts in the whole universe. Sky Palace leader stroked his beard. He was feeling pleased, so he smiled. He admired Isha. He even wanted Isha to become his student. Although something happened to stop her from becoming his student, he was not being cheap with his praises of her. It did not matter what happened before. Since Isha brought the rebate to Sky Palace, he treated Isha like a proper student. Otherwise, no matter how talented Isha was, she could not have leveled up this much in such a short amount of time. Scary teeth knife. From now on, this could be one of the best Geno arts in the universe, second uncle Bai Bai said. Space was being ripped. The wound on Han Sen's shoulder was also being ripped. With the strength of his xenogenic body, it was not quick. Still, he was being ripped slowly but surely. Purple was spreading across his wounds, making his wounds split up further inch by inch. It was like a demon hell ghost mouth opening. That is very powerful knife air. But if you think this kind of knife air can kill me, you have underestimated me. I am Dollar. Han Sun did not move. The wound on his shoulder suddenly went still. It was as if it had frozen. It stopped spreading. It was like the wound and the knife air had been frozen stiff. Han Sun forcefully stopped the universal cogwheel's spin. It made the wound on his body stop. But his power was not enough to wholly reverse the spin of the universal cogwheel. So the wound did not go away. If one slash won't work, I will just have to perform another cut. Isha's voice was cold as ice. She slashed forward with her teeth knife again. There was no defense involved. She used her aggressive knife skills, and that was all. It was a very mad knife skill that only attacked people. In fact, she did not even have to defend. With teeth knife's new scary and destructive powers, it could rip up every substance. If she was able to get a hit on her enemy and kill the enemy, that was already the best defense. Han Sun held the broken scabbard and presented a wry smile. He thought, she does not even want the scabbard. She is trying to kill me. Han Sun was ready to raise the scabbard again, but he noticed something was wrong. Where the scabbard had broken, a weird light flashed from inside. What's going on? The knife air was near him. Han Sun did not have the time to look at what had happened with the scabbard. While he was dodging, he dodged the knife light. The moment Han Sun evaded the knife air, Isha's teeth knife was like a purple bolt of lightning. It slashed and crossed where he had been. But the knife air that had generated in space was like a purple bolt of lightning that did not disappear. It did not just stay in space. It kept ripping. Suddenly, a large parcel of space was doused in purple. It was like a purple spider web in space. Chapter 2849 Return Empty scabbard Han Sen's body flashed. He kept dodging Isha's knife attacks. Her knife air could destroy everything. If a planet was to encounter that knife air, it would be cut in half. That ripping knife air, which could tear the fabric of space, would keep on ripping. The entirety of that space was full of purple knife airs. It was like a giant net. It greatly reduced the safety zones where Han Sen could move. Ripped space was everywhere. If Han Sen's body touched the ripped space, he would be hurt. A knife skill like that. A knife air like that. I am afraid the rebate status will rise a lot after this showing, Dia Robber said. Through Knife Queen's efforts alone, getting into the top 100 is not an impossible feat. What a scary woman. Her knife air seems to be a destroyed god body's weakness. Bar's eyes were shining. He stared at Isha as he spoke. Dia Robber nodded and said, "Yep. Your destroyed god body is powerful. But if you were to encounter her knife air, you would lose your advantage. You would keep ripping and end up dead. If you go up against her, you will have to be careful." At this time, Han Sen was not in the mood to care about how scary Isha's knife airs were. The halved scabbard in his hands was releasing waves of strange power. Han Sen knew that was not normal. If a scabbard could be broken by Isha's knife air, it should keep on ripping. Where this scabbard had broken, knife air did not continue to spread. It still had some light flickering within. The broken scabbard itself was shaking strongly. It was like an object that kept on vibrating. It was like if Han Sen let go, it would fly away. Is there a secret somewhere inside this scabbard? Han Sen was shocked. He had possessed this scabbard for a long time. Aside from the knife mind inside the scabbard, he did not notice anything special. Now, the scabbard's weird changes surprised Han Senator Isha /forward again. Han Sen wanted to evade the strike. From inside the broken scabbard, some power suddenly came out. It was like a volcano erupting out of the scabbard. Everyone was watching Isha madly attack Dollar, whose safe zones were continuing to decrease. Han Sen was going to run out of space to dodge. Suddenly, the half-broken scabbard in his hands had a purple light beam coming out of it. Pang! The purple beam of light struck Isha's knife air and broke it. The purple beam of light blasted through, making the place look like a sea of purple. The space that had been ripped up by teeth knife had been mended by the purple light beam's light. Suddenly, the whole of space returned to the clear black color it usually carried. Aside from the pillar of light, there was no more purple. What is this? This thing can instantly mend torn space, and it can get rid of teeth knife power? Sky Palace leader squinted with his eyes. He looked at Han Sen, who was holding that beam of light. Every creature in the universe was staring at the beam of light Han Sen was holding. Even Isha did not attack him again. She stared at Han Sen's hands. Other people did not know, but Isha did. The scabbard had been left behind by the rebate alpha. The rebate alpha made a wish that the air could locate the scabbard again. That was why Isha took a risk and went to Demon Grave in pursuit of that missing scabbard. But she suffered a bad stroke of luck. She encountered Han Sen, who was posed as Dollar. He had stolen it. Isha only knew that it was a relic that once belonged to the Alpha. She did not know what the secret inside the scabbard was. If she did, she would not have merrily cut through the scabbard. That's why Isha thought this was strange. Her power was already better than the rebate Alpha. But the light beam that came out of the scabbard was able to destroy her knife air. That made her feel shocked. It did not seem to be the power their Alpha should have possessed. If the Alpha had left a power behind inside the scabbard like that, Isha would not have believed it. After the purple light exploded, the shell of the broken scabbard in Han Sen's hand started to melt in the purple light. The casing of the ink-black scabbard melted away. It revealed a smaller scabbard, which looked as if it had been made from purple copper. It had many weird and pretty engravings across it. The purple beam of light came from the engravings that adorned the scabbard. When the symbols started to shine, the scabbard became bigger. It was quickly becoming a 3-foot-long scabbard. The scabbard's light slowly started to dim. After the scabbard's light was extinguished, Isha and all the creatures in the universe saw Han Sen holding a completely new scabbard that was purple. It was different from the black scabbard he was holding before. Isha looked at the purple scabbard with a face that was scribbled with confusion. She had never heard of the Alpha scabbard having another scabbard hidden inside it. That is, return empty scabbard. In the halls of the Extreme King, an Extreme King deified elite, whose beard and hair were completely white, was watching the match intently and stood up. He stared at the purple scabbard in Han Sen's hand. Return empty scabbard. That name suddenly exploded in the hall. Elder Bao, do you really recognize that as the return empty scabbard? Bai King looked at the old Extreme King man with a serious face. I cannot be mistaken. This is definitely return empty scabbard. The elites of the Extreme King's Knife King searched for the return empty scabbard. Back then, my elder Bao King was planning many ways to find the return empty scabbard, but we never did find it. I cannot believe it was in Dollar's hands all along. We must take back the return empty scabbard. Elder Bao was very excited. Yes, return empty scabbard is a treasure that belongs to the Extreme King's king. We cannot allow outsiders to possess it. We must take it back. We must kill Dollar to take back the return empty scabbard. The Extreme King knew the return empty scabbard's history. They were all hungrily rubbing their palms together. They now wanted to go to the space battleground and get the return empty scabbard from Han Senator. The name Knife King was not very famous across the universe. People only knew Knife King was one of the kings of the Extreme King. There was not much about him known across the universe. Knife King had only been a king for the Extreme King for a short amount of time. In the real Extreme King's higher echelon of people, Knife King's reputation was almost as good as the very first king, and perhaps even higher. It involved one of the Extreme King's greatest secrets, which few people knew about. Even within the Extreme King, only those in high-up places knew it. That secret was like an insult to the Extreme King. In the history of the Extreme King, an Extreme King's king became a puppet. Behind all that was a god known as Sky Armor. There were a few Extreme King kings who became a puppet that fell under its control. Although only the high-up members of the Extreme King knew about Sky Armor God, to the Extreme King, it was the most humiliating thing there was in the Extreme King's history. That was until Knife King was born. He was born in space. One slash could break 9 tiers of the sky. He was able to break Sky Armor God and allow the Extreme King to escape the god's control and avoid being humiliated further. Because he was injured too much in his fight, Knife King's lifespan was damaged badly. He became the Extreme King with the shortest reign. The Extreme King did not want to reveal this humiliating history, so Knife King's reputation in the Extreme King was very high. But outsiders did not know him. Much more was known about the other kings. Chapter 2850 Bone is Scabbard. The history of the return empty scabbard was something special. It was a bone torn from the body of Sky Armor God. Back then, only a very few core superiors knew that the rib bone of Sky Armor God was actually his god's personality. It was not a complete god's personality though. Only a part of it had been cut out as Sky Armor God escaped. So the rib bone was not a complete god's personality. There was no sign of a god's sadness manifesting afterward either. If the god's personality had been cut out of the man completely, and a god's sadness showed up, Knife King would have become super famous all around the universe. Since only a part of the rib bone was cut, Knife King knew he had injured his enemy a lot. Jay was an elite who could go to the Geno Hall. Unfortunately, he succumbed and died to sickness. Sky Armor God was damaged because of this. After the god's personality was damaged, it took him many years to recover. When he returned to the Extreme King was not controlled by him anymore. Under Knife King's training, there were a few more true god-class elites in the race. Sky Armor God was unable to find the right opportunity to allow him to dominate the race again. Thus, he used a trick with the god doll inside Destiny's Tower. He tried to make the Extreme King fall under his command again. Han Sun had destroyed the god doll. Because Han Jinji was in the middle of that mess, Sky Armor God thought it was Empty God who had destroyed his god doll. So he harbored a hatred for Empty God too. Sky Armor God had been looking for that rib bone Knife King had cut off, but he had never been able to find where it was. The people of the Extreme King knew that Knife King had turned the rib bone into a scabbard for Knife King to store his return empty knife. When Knife King passed, the return empty knife remained. The return empty scabbard, however, was missing. The Extreme King searched for it for a while, but they could not find out where the return empty scabbard had gone. They would never have thought the return empty scabbard was hidden inside another scabbard, or that it was in the possession of an outsider. Inside a temple, Sky Armor God opened his eyes. He stared at the return empty scabbard Han's son was holding. My rib bone. It has been so many years. I have finally found you. It is now the time to get you back. After a while, Sky Armor God looked away from the return empty scabbard. He looked at Han's son and coldly said, "He is just a larva-class xenogeniac. I just need to possess someone else in the universe. It will be easy to kill him that way." Sky Armor God frowned and said, "He is in the Geno God list now. If he leaves the Geno God list, I cannot find out where he comes from." He went silent. Sky Armor God looked at the Geno God list's matchups. He saw Dollar and Knife Queen's names together. He looked lower and saw Hansen's next match was against a butterfly deified xenogeniac that was famous. If things are this way, I will get my rib bone back through the Geno God list. Sky Armor God stared at Han's son and the return empty scabbard. Han's son did not know where the return empty scabbard came from, but the presence that came from the return empty scabbard sure felt similar to the presence of Sky Vine Radish, an evil lotus god's spirit gene. Hansen thought, weird. Is this scabbard made from the material of God's spirit's God personality? I don't think the rebate Alpha had that sort of money. It is no wonder the Alpha took the scabbard so seriously, Isha said with a frown. She did not strike again. The scabbard is that mysterious. The power of the scabbard seems to go against the teeth knife power. Even my modified teeth knife is restricted by this scabbard. Teeth power was being suppressed by the scabbard. Isha's fighting power was reduced. Beating Dollar would be harder now. Hansen looked at Isha and knew what she was thinking about. He smiled and said, "It looks like your power is being restricted by the scabbard." "So what?" Isha raised her eyebrows. Her hands generated another mass of teeth power. She raised it and pointed it at Han's senator. She was not going to give up. She was going to keep fighting. Suddenly, Hansen's movements shocked everyone in the audience. He flipped his hands over and threw the scabbard to Isha. The scabbard flew right to her and landed on Isha's teeth knife. All the audience was in shock. Even if they did not know what the return empty scabbard was, they were all able to tell that it was a powerful treasure. It was able to restrict Knife Queen's scary knife air. Dollar had casually thrown the return empty scabbard to her. It was hard to understand. Even Isha was shocked by this move. She stared at Han's son and asked, "What is that supposed to mean?" Dollar had a scabbard that could put a lid on her powers. He could have easily won with it, so he did not have to be this nice. "Such knife skills are impressive," Han's son said with a smile. "If you were to lose on behalf of a scabbard, it would be a shame. It does not matter if I win. I will lend you the scabbard for now. Next time I defeat you, I will take it back." Holy crap. This guy is too cocky. How can he play like this? This is insane. He seems to have forgotten that Knife Queen was attacking him a lot earlier. You guys don't know anything. He is obviously hitting on her. That Dollar must have a crush on Knife Queen. Otherwise, why would he give the scabbard to Knife Queen so easily? He might not be able to defeat Knife Queen. Even if he could, Knife Queen could leave the battleground with the scabbard. He would be powerless to stop her. Judging from what you are saying, I believe it makes sense. How dare he flirt with his opponent in the Geno God list? This guy is really daring. Actually, he is quite handsome. If a deified elite did this to me, I would marry him. Stop dreaming. Why would a deified elite want someone like you? Every spirit was talking. Isha coldly stared at Han's son for a while. She did not say anything. She slowly brought out teeth knife. Knife air was like silk. It was cutting the sky and breaking the ground. Isha's power was stronger than before. Even Isha was surprised. The power of the scabbard was enough to restrict her teeth power. In her hands, it was able to boost the teeth power output. By just holding the scabbard, Isha's teeth knife received a strong boost. Back then, the rebate Alpha came into possession of the return empty scabbard by accident. She never learned the secret of the return empty scabbard, but she was able to understand the knife mind inside the scabbard. With it, she created teeth powers and teeth knife. The origin of teeth powers came from the return empty scabbard. Now Isha had the return empty scabbard. She was like a tiger that had been given wings, but the teeth powers effect was a few times stronger. If she was able to understand the return empty scabbard's power, she would improve a lot. Oh no. Oh no. This kid Dollar was too cocky. Knife Queen has the scabbard's help. Her power is much stronger now. She might be able to beat a butterfly elite like this. Dollar has suffered bad luck. Wang Yuhang was happy. It was because he was trying to hit on women during the god fights. He deserves it, Tang Junliu said with a smile. He really envied it. What is this? It should be me, old Tang hitting on girls. Right now Dollar is stealing all the thunder. No, I must become deified. In the next Geno God list fight, I am going to flirt with more than a few deified xenogeneic ladies. Chapter 28:51 One chess piece. Looking at Isha slashing forward, Han Sun did not bother evading like before. He moved his body forward and teleported in front of her. When the teeth knife slashed down from above, Han Sun pulled out his right hand's middle finger and index finger to catch the teeth knife's body. That scary knife power was captured by Han Sun's fingers. The attack was unable to proceed anymore. Isha's vision was like a blade. Her body's power was gathering on the knife. She kept trying to press the blade down. As Han Sun's fingers continued to clamp it, the teeth knife looked as if it was growing roots. It was unable to move. It looks like the God Spirit Gene's Geno armament is rather lame. With the buff of the scabbard, Isha's power is still able to override my xenogeneic body. Han Sun had given Isha the scabbard because he wanted to see how powerful the scabbard was. If Isha was able to use the scabbard to beat him, he would let Isha keep the scabbard as a reward for being his teacher. When Isha received the scabbard's boon, she was still unable to influence the universal cogwheels that were currently under the Dongxian Sutra's control. It could not be spun. It was because Han Sun's xenogeneic body was too strong, and Isha had just received the scabbard. She was unable to activate the scabbard's entire power. Most importantly, the scabbard was not made from just a god's personality. Compared to a god's personality armament, it was considerably weaker. How does that work? Dollar's power can restrict a scary knife queen who attacks like that. Is he butterfly class? Judging from his level of power, he should only be larva class. A larva class being with this sort of power must mean he is the best of the same level though. It is no wonder Dollar is so cocky. He has what it takes to be. Han Sun released his hands and retreated a few steps. He looked at Isha and said, "Knife Queen, I do not think you have enough power to beat me." Isha looked at Han Sun strangely. She flipped her hands and threw the scabbard back to Han Senator. When Han Sun caught the scabbard, Isha was already flying out of the space battleground. "When I beat you, I will take back the scabbard." A cold voice echoed throughout the space battleground. Han Sun did not say anything. He left the space battleground. Han Sun had won the match quickly and cleanly, but there were too many deified creatures. Many of them, including Zheng Xiandao, Dragon 1, Demon Alpha, Destroyed Leader, and the Very High Leader, were taking part. That was a whole bunch of scary people. Golden Growler continued to prove itself invincible. No creature dared enter the space battleground to fight it. Thus, Han Sun's performance made people's eyes brighten. He had reached a level that shocked people. Back in the garden, Han Sun saw God sitting on a stone chair. There was a chessboard atop the stone table. God looked at Han Sun and said, "Your power is not comparable to anyone else in the same class. Even against a butterfly-class creature, you are pretty good. You have such powerful genes. It should be carried on by ancient blood. Yet, you do not look like anyone with ancient blood. It is very strange. Can you tell me what race you belong to?" "I am human," Han Sun casually answered. He saw the chess pieces were in a stalemate. He was confused and asked, "Who were you playing chess with?" "Just an interesting guy," God said with a smile. "An interesting guy, huh? Where is he?" Han Sun did not see anyone else there. "He is here," God said and pointed at the chessboard. "Here." Han Sun looked at the chessboard with confusion. Aside from the chessboard itself, he could neither see nor feel anything else. "He is inside the chessboard," God said with a laugh. Is he? Han Sen's face changed. He closely inspected the chessboard's chess pieces. He saw a black chess piece that looked very weird. The black and white chess pieces were very simple. There were not many differences between them, but this black chess piece was carved with a symbol. It was an old man symbol. Why does this symbol look so familiar? Oh crap. Han Sen opened his mouth in shock. With a look of disbelief he asked, "Is that holy pirate? Why was he turned into a chess piece?" "He made 3 wishes to me. One of them was that he wished to play chess. I fulfilled his wish." God pointed to the chessboard and asked, "Are you interested in finishing the round?" Han Sen shook his head. He did not want to end up like Holy Pirate and become a chess piece on a chessboard. "Don't worry. He is only like that because he made a wish to me," God said with a laugh. "I am only going to play chess with you. Nothing else." Han Sen shook his head. "My chess skills are only average. You should find a chess master to play against you. Your Geno art is very familiar to the very high sense," God said. "Chess is very good for you to understand things. Learning how to play well might serve you." Han Sen knew God was right. The Dongxian Sutra and the game of chess had a lot in common. In the past he had researched chess skills, so his chess abilities were pretty good. But playing chess against God was more than practice. There was bound to be a lot more pressure in a game of chess that was more like a deathmatch. If he fell for God's tricks, there was every chance he could end up like Holy Pirate. Han Sen shook his head and said, "I am going to prepare the next round. I do not have time to play." Han Sen was telling the truth. He needed to reach butterfly class before the next round began. "If you lose, you do not have to give me anything. If you win, I can give you this chess piece." God pointed at the chess piece that Holy Pirate had become. "What would I need that chess piece for?" Han Sen shook his head. "People can become chess pieces, and chess pieces can become people. If you have this chess piece, you can do anything you want with it. He can only do what you want him to do. If there is a knife mountain fire sea ahead, he cannot regret it." After speaking, God picked up a white piece, placed it on the chessboard, smiled and said, "Your turn." Han Sen did not know what Holy Pirate's level was, but he had to be at least butterfly class since he could freely enter and leave Space Garden. Having a deified creature that could be controlled like that would be very good for him. Holy Pirate also had the power to freely enter and exit Space Garden, which worried Han Senator. He was concerned that Holy Pirate would become a tool for people of other races to attack Space Garden. If he was able to keep Holy Pirate in his pocket, that would be beneficial. It was a big temptation, but Han Sen did not dare believe God. "I said that for the next half a year, I would not do anything to harm you," God coldly said. "I will not break my promise. You should know that God cannot lie." "Okay, you make a bet with me to do this." "I suppose I will participate." Han Sen picked up a chess piece and sat opposite of God. Han Sen thought his chess skills weren't too shabby. In the Alliance, he was one of the top-class chess players. When he played chess with God, he lost badly. Stalemates didn't count. Han Sen and God played 8 rounds. Han Sen lost each and every time. He was unable to fight back. He lost completely. Han Sen playing chess with God was like playing against a supercomputer. The moves he made took forever to calculate, but his opponent would respond with a move that seemed almost random. It did not look as if God even thought about what to do. Even so, Han Sen sorely lost each time. Chapter 2852 Leveling Up Failed. God smiled and looked at Han Sen and said, "You leveled up fast. If you wish to win this game of chess, you will have to work harder. Let's play again some other time. For now, I need to practice and get ready for the next fight." Han Sen wanted to keep playing chess, but his temper was something special. The more he lost, the more he wanted to go on. He wanted to keep trying until he beat his opponent. Upon thinking of becoming butterfly class, he stated his desire to keep playing chess. "Can I look at the scabbard?" God asked. "It is just a broken scabbard. There is nothing to see." Han Sen stood up. He wanted to go straight to Nine Defense Palace. "If I have guessed it correctly, you were the one that killed Skyvine Radish," God casually said. "You should possess his God personality. If you allow me to inspect the scabbard, I can tell you how to use Sky Vine Radish's God personality. I don't have a God personality. If you want to see it that much, then take it. It is just a broken scabbard. What good is there to see? Han Sun pulled out the scabbard to show God. He had 2 God personalities already, but he did not know how to make use of them. It was pointless for him to keep holding on to them. If he knew how to use them, it would be very good for him. God took the scabbard and analyzed it while speaking to Han Sr. It is an armament made from a broken God personality. This should be Sky Armor God's God personality. Han Sun guessed that the scabbard was made from a God personality. He did not expect it to be a broken God personality, or that it belonged to Sky Armor God. After seeing it, God returned the scabbard to Han Sun, smiled and said, "Here is some advice. If you meet Sky Armor God, do not reveal this scabbard to him." "I thought gods could not do anything to the creatures of the universe," Han Sun said. "That is how things are supposed to work, but it depends on how you apply the rules." God didn't really explain anything. "Are you saying that Sky Armor God will come and try to steal the scabbard?" Han Sun asked. "Maybe. You should just be careful anyway." God was not willing to talk anymore, and said that something needed to be prepared. God was going to tell Han Sun how to make use of a God personality another time. Han Sun went to Nine Defense Palace a few times as part of his preparation to become a butterfly. Seeing Han Sun walk away, God looked up into space where the Geno God list was. Upon seeing the next opponent Han Sun was up against, God said with a strange expression, "There is only Abyss Knight in the bottomless abyss. With Sky Armor God's personality, he will try to possess the Abyss Knight. He will cast a God body landing. He will take back the God personality when he joins the Geno God list. That means the next fight will be interesting. Let me see what your level is." In Nine Defense Palace, Han Sun opened up an empty palace and went inside. He quickly closed it. He did not know if he could avoid God watching him, but it was all he could do. Battle body evolving. After Han Sun chose to level up, he felt as if the cells of his entire body were changing. It was like countless currents of electricity coursed through his cells. It made his body feel itchy and numb. It was like his bones were going to become crispy. Kacha! Han Sun seemed to hear his own bones being torn up, which shocked him. He quickly looked inside his body. He noticed it was not his bones that were cracking. The bones were actually growing really fast. It was like a child growing at an accelerated rate. When his flesh grew, Han Sun's body became bigger. He went from looking like a child to having the appearance of an adult. But things hadn't ended just yet. The Extreme King's overbearing eye, which had combined with Han Sen's eye because it had absorbed the gene changes of his genes, started to change too. Han Sen's changes did not quite feel the same. The Extreme King's overbearing eye was true God class. The changes triggered a tide of power to drown Han Sen's body. After combining with the Extreme King's overbearing eye, he hadn't been able to notice any differences with his own eyes. He also could not use the power the Extreme King's overbearing eye contained. Now, the Extreme King's overbearing eye was changing with Han Senator. It made him feel like he was being drowned in the Extreme King's overbearing eye's power. Everything he saw became black and white. It did not matter if it was a yellow metal wall or a red pillar. All the colors in Han Sen's eyes became white. It was scarily white. It was like he was in a 2D comic book world. Everything was white. Only when Han Sen's eyes drew closer to the palace's Xenogeneic did he see black. It was different from before. Han Sen's eyes were only showing things in black and white. Now when he looked at the Xenogeneic, he could see the Xenogeneic had greed, hopelessness, toxins, hatred, jealousy and pride. He was able to see all those negative emotions. Han Sun was able to understand that there was something wrong. In all the palace around him, there were no more Xenogeneics. The one closest to him was 7 palaces away. He was able to see the black Xenogeneic 7 palaces away. It was very weird. Han Sun looked in another direction. He saw Xenogeneics inside other palaces. In Han Sun's eyes they were black. Some of them were darker while others were lighter. Han Sun suddenly realized that the black meant crime. The darker it was, the more crimes the creature had accumulated. Han Sun looked at himself. He realized his body was transparent. One could not see if he was black or white. It looks like in every era, every enforcer has a special type of authority, Han Sen said to mock himself. Battle body has successfully leveled up to butterfly. Battle body evolving. Why is it still evolving? Han Sen was surprised. He had just become a butterfly, but he didn't absorb xenogeneic genes. So, how could he keep on evolving? It looks like it is the effect of the Extreme King's overbearing eye. Han Sen felt his body continue to change. It was different from the previous changes. Now every time he changed, Han Sen felt his body connect to the universe more and more. It wasn't the whole universe purse. More accurately, it was the power of law in the universe. Because of the Extreme King's overbearing eye, Han Sen was evolving toward the rule, and he was becoming a true god because of it. The black and white eye in Han Sen's hand was becoming stronger. The black and white rule god light was going to break space and go to the sky. Han Sen's whole body was full of rule power. Now Han Sen had the wrong feeling. He seemed to control some sort of amazing power. If he was willing, he could judge a creature's sin how he wanted to. But this power was very weird. Strength was no longer the scale of Han Sen's power now. He scaled with the sins of his opponent. The more sins an opponent had, the more power Han Sen could judge it by. BZT. Han Sen's eye exhibited changes that flipped the sky and ground. Clearly, his other eye was different. He felt it receive a big power jump. Is this true god power? Han Sen felt the changed eye keep spreading. It was like it was leading his body to be deified. Han Sen was suddenly shaking. The power that spread from his eye returned to his eye like the tide. All the changes stopped. An announcement played in Han Sen's head. Battle body leveling up failed. Chapter 2853. The conditions to shapeshift Han Sen. Super God Spirit Body Geno Battle Body. Xenogeneic, Butterfly Class. Level, Deified Progress. 0 out of 100 Lifespan. 2658. Han Sen looked at his information and noticed he had leveled up to butterfly. He was relieved. He was also confused. Even though his ascension to true God level had failed, the weird changes deployed into his left eye had not disappeared. He had still managed to combine with the Extreme King's overbearing eye. He saw things in black and white. The effects were the same as they had been while he was undergoing the evolution process. Han Sen took out a mirror to inspect his eyes. He noticed there was not much difference between his left and right eye. His left eye's pupil was darker, and the white of the eye was more brilliant. One was unable to tell the difference unless one looked closely. It is good that nothing happened. Han Sen was not greedy. He knew he would become true God sooner or later, so there was no need to rush it. Han Sen's heart jumped. The spell suddenly came out of his body. His xenogeneic mode had ended. Han Sen was his true self again. Finally, I am back to normal. Han Sen was happy. He went to have a look at his resources. He noticed his 4 battle bodies had also leveled up to butterfly class. It was the same as when he was in his xenogeneic mode. Although everything was back to normal, there was something troublesome he needed to fix. Han Sen was still with the Extreme King, so he had to maintain his identity as Holy Baby. Unfortunately, he could not become Holy Baby again, which created a serious problem. I was so focused on leveling up that I totally forgot about that. Han Sen felt a headache come on. He could not figure out a solution. If Han Sen resumed being a xenogeneic, he would be recognized as Dollar. If he departed 9 Defense Palace and people saw him, it would create chaos and turmoil for the Extreme King. While Han Sen was being troubled by this, he suddenly saw God appear in the 9 Defense Palace and slowly approach him. Han Sen was unsure when God had even arrived. He was only able to see God because of his left eye. God was actually quite far away from the palace that Han Sen was in. Weird. God is white. Han Sen was confused. God had harmed many creatures, which should have meant the accumulation of many crimes. Yet Han Sen saw that God had a pure white color. There was no crime visible at all. Han Sen was speechless and thought, I have no idea how the Extreme King's overbearing eye judges crimes. He walked out of the palace and went straight to God. God looked at Han Sen, smiled and said, Congratulations, you became butterfly class. There is nothing to congratulate me about, Han-sun said. I became butterfly class, but I cannot look like a child again. The extreme kings will not recognize me. I do not know if I should expect trouble. That is easy to fix, God said with a smile. I can teach you a shape-shifting Geno art. After using that skill, you can change your body into any shape you want. As long as you don't expose yourself, not even true gods will be able to tell the difference. What must I do for it? Han-sun asked. He was now on high alert when it came to God. There is nothing you need to do, God said with a shake of his head. No, you should just tell me the price. I like a good price tag. I don't buy things that don't come with price tags. Han-sun shook his head. He did not think God's gifts were so easily plucked. Okay, if you want it that badly, I'll apply a condition. After pausing, God said, from now on, you cannot kill any creature that says I love you to you. You must let it live. Is that okay? 2. Who would say those 3 words to me? Han-sun was confused. He did not believe God could see the future. If God was able to see through it all, Han Jinji, and that sacred person would not have been able to defeat him. If God was unable to see the future, why would he suggest something so ridiculous? 1. I do not know, God said with a smile. Do you agree to this term? Deal. Han-sun nodded. Even if God had a trick up his sleeve, as long as he did not kill Han-sun, all would be fine. This is a shapeshifter skill Geno art from Namu. I edited it a little. It is quite an interesting shapeshifter skill. It will really change the shape of your body. It does not employ magic, so no one can see through it unless you expose yourself. God showed the shapeshifter skill to Han-sun. Shapeshifter skills required effective power management, which was something Han-sun was accomplished with. He was good at it in no time at all. The skill was easy for him to learn. God glanced at Han-sun, who looked like holy baby again, and complimented him profusely. It's a very powerful talent. This shapeshifter skill has very high requirements for talents and genes. Only the Namu and a few races with a similar talent can practice it. I did not expect you to be able to learn it so easily. It seems as if your genes really are abnormal. Han-sun understood that God had taught him this Geno art as a test. Han-sun looked at God and asked, what are you doing here? Did I not tell you that I was going to teach you how to use a God personality? God asked, I am ready now. How do you use a God personality? Han-sun asked, do you need special tools? There is no need for such trouble, God said. Putting the God personality into the scabbard is the worst idea. In fact, a God personality has a materialized power. For creatures that are not a god, opening that kind of power requires an extra step. Follow me. God suddenly jumped into space. An old set of stairs suddenly appeared beneath Han-sun's feet. They went all the way into the nothingness. Han-sun was not able to see what was at the end of the emptiness. Han-sun knew that if God was forcing him to go, there was no use resisting. He quickly stepped onto the stone steps and descended toward the emptiness. After he walked down the stone stairs, Han-sun felt as if he was stepping into a different world. He turned around to look, but he could no longer see the 9 Defense Palace. Han-sun raised his head and looked at the top of the stone steps. He now saw a palace floating there. From far away, Han-sun saw that the old and mysterious palace had a plaque. It said it was the Sky Radish God Temple. Sky Radish Temple? Is this related to Skyvine Radish? Han-sun was shocked. He checked out the temple floating in the air. After having a look, Han-sun discovered that the temple was made of old vines. The vines looked petrified. They were green and grayish. Han-sun would have thought they were just stones. God was stepping onto the stairs. He went in front of Sky Radish Temple and pushed open the temple's doors. Han-sun saw that the temple's hall had a god spirit inside. It was Skyvine Radish. Chapter 2854. Sky Radish God Lance. Han-sun was shocked. This Skyvine Radish looked the same as the one he had previously killed. It was as if he had come alive again. Even the shockwaves from this Skyvine Radish were the same as those from the one he had seen before. The exception was that they were more powerful. God looked at the giant Skyvine Radish as he said, "This is just Skyvine Radish's god body. Without a god personality, The god body is just a shell. Such impressive power. Hansun didn't believe him, so he asked, "Is it really just a shell? If it was not a shell, why would he still have not moved, especially since you have entered his temple?" God gazed at the statue that looked like Skyvine Radish and said, "Break this god body and bring out Skyvine Radish's god personality. Then, you will learn how to use it." Hansun looked at God as he asked, "I am not going to replace a statue in this temple, right? If it was that easy to become a god, then being a god wouldn't be something so mighty," God said with a smile. Hansun didn't say anything. He gathered up power and threw his palm at the god body's shell. His hand was unable to harm the motionless god body. His power felt empty when it hit the god body. It was like the god body did not even exist. God laughed. "That is a god. How is going to be hurt by ordinary power? Unless you level up to true god class, your power cannot hurt it, or its shell. Try your scabbard. That should work." "Why? After I killed Skyvine Radish, there was a god body of his here." Hansun pulled out the return empty scabbard. Like a knife in his hand, he put the scabbard to work. But he did not hit Skyvine Radish's god body. God is immortal. No creature is supposed to be able to kill a god. But gods do have their downsides. For example, gods cannot deal damage directly onto a creature of the universe. That sample applies to ordinary folk that aren't even capable of leveling up. Gods cannot kill these things themselves, but there are exceptions. God stopped talking. What exceptions? Hansen's heart was wildly jumping. This was a secret he had wished to unravel for a long time. If a god separates its own god personality from its god body, and combines its god personality with a creature from the universe, it will generate a big universe god body. That big universe god body has a power that can ignore the limitations imposed on gods. It can kill creatures in the big universe. And the big universe loses its power of immortality too. If they are killed, or the god personality is lost, they can die. God pointed at Skyvine Radish and said, "Just like this numpty, he forced his way into the universe, and used his big universe god body to fight creatures in the big universe. In the end he was heavily wounded. He did not even have enough power to return to the temple. It enabled you to snare him so easily." Hansen finally understood why some gods could be killed, and why some gods could not be killed. That was the difference. So, are you saying that if a god does not force itself into the universe, it will not die no matter what happens? Hansen asked. According to the theory, that is correct, God said with a nod. Hansen stared at God as he asked, "So are you saying that they can actually die?" God laughed and said, "Do you think I would tell you what my weakness is? You should hurry up and kill his god body. I do not want to remain in this boring place any longer." Hansen stopped hesitating. He used the return empty scabbard like a knife, and slashed at the shell god body. Dong! Hansen's hit landed atop Skyvine Radish's god body shell. It only left a very light mark, but god blood still came out from it. Seeing that the shell god body did not react, Hansen held the scabbard harder. He kept slashing and slashing. He did not know how many times he attacked it, but he eventually lopped the empty god body's head off. One Hansen looked at God, who shook his head and said, "You cannot kill god spirits like that. You must destroy his god base." What is a god base? Hansen asked. The base stone of a god is the god base of one's body. You need to destroy the god base. Do that, and the whole body will collapse. Before Hansen could ask a question, God said, "Every god's god base is different. Skyvine Radish's god base should be in his left arm." Hansen looked at Skyvine Radish's left arm. He saw that the left arm had a vine on it. Aside from that, there were no notable aspects that differentiated it from the right arm. Hansen had to give it a shot. He waved his scabbard at the left arm of the god body shell. He did not know how many times he slashed. When Hansen eventually cut off the left arm with the vine, the entire god body collapsed. God blood, god bones, and god flesh burst into flames. It did so in a green glowing light. "Take out Skyvine Radish's god personality," God said. Hansen took out Skyvine Radish's 6-foot-long green vine bone. He watched the green light in the sky heading straight for the bone. When the green bone absorbed the green light, the light on the body burned brighter. Something was changing. The old vine-looking bone suddenly turned into a green lance. The tip was curled like a snake. It displayed a god light that could not be described. Gained God personality armament, Sky Radish Bone Lance. This announcement trumpeted in his head. Han Sun looked at the Sky Radish Bone Lance. The Sky Radish Bone Lance played a message inside Han Sen's brain. Sky Radish Bone Lance. Destroyed God-class personality armament. The Sky Radish Bone Lance was just like a beast's soul. Han Sun thought he could drop it in his sea of soul. But he did not do that in front of God. Boom! 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 Suddenly, a green beam of light lit up the base of the temple. In that green beam of light, Han Sun saw an old vine that looked like green jade. It was forming something. Is that Sky Vine Radish's god personality? Han Sun recognized it. That old green vine was Sky Vine Radish's bone. It was just like the green bone before it had become the Sky Radish Bone Lance. God smiled and said, I already told you. Gods are immortal here. You brought Sky Vine Radish his god personality and destroyed his god body here. That means you killed him here. Of course he can be reborn again. God paused and added, don't worry. Although Sky Vine Radish can be reborn again, you have still reaped the rewards. Otherwise, how could you turn a god personality into a god personality armament? Han Sun was prepared. He knew that everything God did had two sides to it. This was the other half. Han Sun was not surprised. He just wanted to remind himself that when he was with God in the future, he always had to be careful. While the two of them spoke, the green bone had already formed. The green bone started to generate its flesh and organs. It was rebuilding Sky Vine Radish's god body. Should I leave now? Han Sun did not want to see Sky Vine Radish alive. This is so rare, God coldly said. Not many people can see a god spirit rebuild its god body. Let's just watch it. With me here, Sky Vine Radish will not dare to harm one hair on your head. Han Sun did not say anything. He watched Sky Vine Radish's god body rebuilt. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.